You see that ship? I was on there. Judging by the alarms, you can probably guess that something was terribly wrong. Well, you'd be right, because the ship was crashing. This mysterious planet appeared out of nowhere, and now the ship was heading straight for it. Thankfully, there was an escape pod, so I'm not in that burning wreckage that you see on your screen. No, I'm right here, on this little raft, having to scavenge technology to find a way to get off this planet and back into space. Wish me luck as I gear up to face many foes who want me to meet a watery grave. The entire planet is covered in water because this is the world of OceanBlock. You want to play mod packs with friends, but you can't seem to find a good server. And the free ones? With the big mod packs these days, free servers are just too laggy. Luckily for you, there's BISECT hosting. They host my server, and with plenty of affordable options, they can host your server too. And the best part is, they support almost every mod pack. Use code Doublesal at checkout for 25% off your first order. BISECT hosting, a great site for great servers. Well, it looks like I crashed. Thankfully, it could have been worse. Now, where I crashed, that's the big question. There's water, some floating rafts around, and an island. It's a good thing the escape pod held together. Unfortunately, I didn't pack that much stuff, so we're gonna have to improvise. But improvising is what I do best. At least that's what I tell myself. Let's get the facts straight. The ship crashed, and now we're stranded. We have to follow a path if we want to get off alive, and the first thing I have to do is fix my comm and get some food. Thankfully, there are some emergency rations I can choose from. After picking my rations, it was time to fix the comm link, which required copper wires and a slime ball. Now, there were no slimes, nor were there copper wires, but there were lots of rafts, and each raft had crates and barrels. And inside of those crates and barrels, random materials, which meant I was gonna have to hop from raft to raft until I found what I needed. Some of the stuff I collected was useful, some of it not so much. But there was plenty of wood, that way I could make a crafting table, so we were off to a somewhat decent start. Because I crafted flint shears, I was awarded with a bat, that way I could break the barrels faster. Now with the flint shears in hand, it was time to go to the next raft where I was going to break up the banner to get string. Reason I needed string was because I was going to craft an item that would allow me to sift through the water to collect materials. Now that the banners were broken and the string was being collected, it was time to test out the bat. This thing smashed through the barrels instantly, and one of the things I got was kelp goo, which I could convert into slime. I was also able to craft a raft. That way I wouldn't have to swim in the water, because honestly, who knows what's lurking down there? With the bamboo and some string that I had collected, the raft was crafted, and now I had a new method of transportation to get from raft to raft. After taking it for a little test sail, it definitely beats swimming. Shout out to the mod makers for including this. This is definitely better than a regular boat. Also, it's pretty stable. Now, right as I was about to get to work, I heard a strange noise coming from outside. So I went to go investigate, and guess what? There was a squid taking a free ride on my raft! Thankfully, the problem, it resolved itself. Now that that was taken care of, I had some free sponge. Not that the sponge was going to be extremely useful, but that's enough distractions for now. It was time to get back to work. The first thing I did was craft a mesh. With some string and some sticks, I now had a net that could sift items. That's where the water strainer comes in. With the strainer now built, it was time to place it in the water, attach the mesh, and now, as you can see, items are being pulled from the seawater. This was a big deal, because with these pebbles, we could now craft cobblestone. We had just made an amazing advancement, even though we were stranded in the middle of the ocean. But to get enough blocks, that was going to take too long. So I went to this random mushroom island that was right next to the escape pod, hoping to find some stone. I found a lot of dirt, and on top of that, something less useful: wolves. But they weren't just any wolves, these were Wilden Hunters. They were these possessed creatures that would multiply out of thin air, and they were not happy to see me, so I had to abandon the island as quickly as possible. One of them almost took my head off, and as I was trying to get away, he multiplied into even more wolves. I'm just gonna leave that island alone until there's some daylight. Thankfully, I had some dirt, and now that I had dirt, I could finally put to work the saplings that were being collected in the sifter. Growing a tree right on top of your escape pod. I don't know if that's something I recommend, but what choice do we have? Looks like the sifter collected a bunch of saplings, so we do have some variety. But for now, let's just stick with simple oak. You're probably wondering why I'm doing a little dance on the sapling. Well, according to the mod pack, the more I sneak, the faster the tree's gonna grow. if you have a hoe in your hand. So, wish I realized that sooner. Thank God I'm alone on this planet. Otherwise, this would look pretty weird. I continued to sneak over the sapling, but it was taking way too long. Honestly, I didn't know what the holdup was until the tree decided to surprise me. I was awarded with some bottles of XP. Once I smashed and collected all the experience, it was time for a good night's sleep because I had a long day ahead of me. The next morning, it was time to do a little more exploring. Thankfully, I had a nice hearty breakfast of meat rations, so I was going to be good for the day. Today's objectives were pretty simple. All I wanted to do was go around and collect more materials. Who knows? Maybe I could find something very interesting, like an obsidian boat. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretty sure obsidian doesn't float. Well, in this mod pack, it does. We'll probably find a use for this later. We'll just store it for now. By this point, I had collected enough stone to make a furnace, which was a big deal because now we could finally start smelting items. The first thing I did was cook the kelp goo. Once the kelp goo was cooked, I finally had my slime ball, which meant I could repair my comlink. Now that I had the comlink in hand, it was time to see what this world was really about. I wanted to get a better grasp of my situation, so I right-clicked the device only to discover that I was truly stranded in the middle of nowhere. All that was around me was nothing but water, miles of it, along with some random little islands scattered here and there, but yeah, I was in a pretty bad spot. Thankfully, I had trees growing, tools being made. If I wanted to get off of this planet alive, then I had to get to work, which meant sailing even more. I made a second trip to the Mushroom Island, thankfully during the day, which meant that there weren't any wolves to hassle me. I attempted to cheat the system by mining stone with a pickaxe, because honestly waiting for the sifter to collect pebbles was taking too long. That wasn't working. But my day immediately got better when I saw that there was an airdrop incoming. Someone was looking out for me. Who, I have no idea, but they were sending supplies. There were 4 chests on top of a platform that carefully descended from the sky, and inside of the chests, random objects that would be of use to me later. Objects like this diamond hammer. That is a great thing to have, especially in my situation. More tools means more progress. There were also components for machines that I had no idea how to work, along with random ores that I could process later. But the discoveries didn't stop there. As soon as I left the supply drop area, I rode past the Mushroom Island only to discover something else, a tower sticking out of the water. The tower had an interior, and inside, some interesting objects. For starters, there was a water elevator, and behind that, a mob spawner. Now, I wasn't going to wait for the monsters to start spawning, so I instantly broke that thing. I had no reason to get my health low, especially when I didn't have the proper weapons to defend myself. Even though the sun was setting, I still wanted to see what was at the top of that water elevator. Who knows? Maybe something priceless. Maybe something that I could use that would save me from this watery grave. After being lifted to the top, the only thing I saw was a single crate, and well, my inventory was full, so I was just gonna leave it alone for now. The moon was beginning to rise to mark the end of a very productive day. That airdrop filled my inventory, so it was time to start creating a little bit of storage space. I had plenty of items, and even though I didn't know what half of the stuff did, I was still happy to have it. There was a very long checklist of things I had to do, but as long as I completed the tasks, I would continue to be awarded. The next objective was a simple one. All I had to do was convert some wood into charcoal. So I did that, put some logs in the furnace, let them cook, you know how it is. From there, it was time to move on to the next project, making a dripper. Now, a dripper converts dirt into clay by dripping water onto it. The crafting recipe was pretty simple, and after I put one together, I placed it on the ceiling, and for it to start working, I had to fill it with some water. Unfortunately, I didn't have any buckets to scoop up water. Thankfully, there was a workaround. Bowls. Who would have thought that a bowl could carry water? Everyone, but you know, in Minecraft, that's a groundbreaking thing. As you can imagine, these bowls don't carry that much water, which meant I had to make a few trips. Once that was finished, it was time to break up cobblestone into gravel, and then gravel into dirt. Now that I had the dirt, all I had to do was place it under the dripper, which was filled with water, and let the magic happen. It didn't take long, a couple of drips and drops, and eventually the dirt was converted into clay. It was the morning of day 3, and to start my day, I decided to pay a visit to the Mushroom Island. There I was going to collect a lot of dirt, that way I could convert it into more clay. Honestly, the process of breaking up the cobblestone into gravel and then breaking the gravel into dirt, that was taking way too long. I also mined some stone, which was finally breaking thanks to the help of my diamond hammer. Back at the escape pod, the strainer was getting pretty full, so I collected some saplings, that way I could have more wood. It was only day 3, but the escape pod was beginning to feel a little claustrophobic, so I was gonna have to do something about it. First, I had to grow the trees, and once the trees grew, it was time to chop them down. With the extra lumber, I was able to expand my platform outwards into the water, that way I could have more space to work. I didn't have a lot of wood planks to work with, so to get the most out of them, I converted the planks into slabs. As for the build, I wasn't shooting for anything fancy. I just wanted a place to stretch my legs. This first platform that I was working on was going to be a tree farm. Growing 2 trees at a time, it's just not enough. So I was shooting for at least 6 trees. Maybe 8. It didn't take long until the platform was finally complete. As you can see, this platform was an utter masterpiece. I spared no expense. I even decided to add some torches, that way the trees could have a little light. With the tree farm now complete, it was time for a grand tour. Take a look around. As you can see, we have some saplings and some wood planks and torches, and yeah, there is the tree farm. But the renovations didn't stop there. The escape pod was still way too claustrophobic, so I had to take some things down. Open a few doors, open a few windows. I needed space because I was going to craft and place an item called a sluice. Now, what is a sluice? It's a tool I'm going to use to finally get some ores. Crafting recipe's pretty simple. Some logs, a stick, and like that you have a sluice. But for the sluice to work, you have to provide it with some water. Also, you have to attach another mesh to it. The reason I want this is because it gives you nuggets. I can take those nuggets and convert them into ingots. This tool is essential. It's basically the substitute for the caves that don't exist on this planet. There's a small chance of getting gold, redstone, you can even filter dirt to get different types of saplings. Of course, to use this tool, I had to supply it with water, and seeing as how I only had bowls, well, like I said before, I had to make a lot of trips, which was incredibly annoying. After feeding it water, it was time to go get some more string, that way I could craft the mesh. We can't use the sluice without a mesh. Broke some banners with my flint shears, and once the banners dropped string, I was set to craft the thing. That was not supposed to rhyme, by the way. I don't know why there are times where I say sentences and they just rhyme naturally. I sound like Dr. Seuss, but yeah, I'm gonna demonstrate how the sluice works. So I got some gravel here, you place it through the mesh, and it feeds straight into that little tray down there, and in the chest you get nuggets. In its current state, there is no way to auto-feed blocks into the sluice, so we're gonna have to do it manually by hand. Now that we had a fully functional sluice, we needed a lot of gravel. Gravel to filter through, that way we could get plenty more nuggets. I was gonna have to break up a ton of cobblestone blocks. This was a slow and tedious process, but as of right now, it was the only way to get materials. I crafted some doors and placed them at the entrance and exit, that way nothing could sneak up on me while I was focused on breaking the blocks. One of the Modpack challenges was actually processing the cobblestone into dust. To get dust, you have to break it down to sand, and then from sand, you get the dust block. It filters through just like all of the others, and it has a small chance of dropping some good stuff. But yeah, it was a lot of rinse and repeat here. That's what you can expect from this mod pack. Eventually the chest was starting to get full, so I had to upgrade it to a double chest. Once the double chest was created, it was time to go back to rinsing and repeating until I had enough iron nuggets to make these iron clusters. The only problem, when I put them in the furnace, they wouldn't smelt. So I had no idea how I was supposed to refine these ores. Thankfully, I got another airdrop. Hopefully something in there would prove to be useful. No, just more iron clusters, which I couldn't do anything with, so yeah, I was in a bit of a pickle here. There were also copper clusters along with some cables for another machine I had no idea how to use. The next chest had a melon and a lever, and as for the final chest, a banana, an air charge, and what looked like a cinnamon roll. Yeah, not a lot of useful stuff in this one, so I decided to make the most of my situation and just mine up all the wool. I'm sure I would have more use out of that than the items I found in the chest. I broke apart the parachute. Eventually, I had gathered enough wool to take back to the escape pod, but not before first eating the source berry roll. Now, this berry roll must have been laced with something, because as soon as I ate it, I was emitting particles. So, yeah, I don't know what that was about, but it was time for another base expansion. With some slabs, I was beginning to wrap around the entire escape pod. I was about to demolish the thing because it was, like I said, claustrophobic. I added some trapdoor railing, that way nothing could come up from the water and attack me, and once the trapdoors were added, it was finally time to demolish the old build. I was grateful that the escape pod had sheltered me from death, but like all things, it had to come to an end. Once the escape pod was demolished, I began moving all of my items, like the sluice, my bed. I reinforced the floor, and with the blocks from the escape pod, I began constructing a trailer. A nice place where I could rest my head. If there's one thing you can take from this video, is that it's always good to recycle. With the recycled blocks, I finally had a new home complete with lights, an interior where I could sleep. It was all coming together. I even added a light in the water, that way I could see what was coming up just in case something wanted to sneak up on me. Now it was finally time to get some rest. Day 5 was a very productive day, and I was hoping that day 6 would be just as fulfilling. Unfortunately, I was beginning to realize that there were some bottlenecks in my progression. One of the big bottlenecks being the production of stone and turning it into gravel. As you can see, the strainer is full of stones, and it takes way too long to convert all of those pebbles into blocks and then to take the blocks and break them into gravel. There had to be a faster way. The bigger problem was actually breaking the blocks into gravel, like I said. Yeah, this was such a chore. If I wanted to get ore, I had to go through this long, convoluted process, at least until I discovered that I had vein miner. Yeah, that's right. I didn't have to break the blocks one by one, I could mine them in an instant. Vein miner was a game changer. It also meant that I could progress to the next task of making a farm. The next task was called underwater growth. I had to make a farm that would grow crops under the water line. I don't know why, but that's what it required of me. So I made a platform that was submerged underneath the waterline, placed the dirt down, that way we could grow the crops, and once the dirt was placed, using some leftover slabs, I created a nice little barrier around my farm. That way the fish or anything that wanted to swim by wouldn't trample on my crops. Now, where would I get the seeds from? Thankfully, I had a nice little stockpile after filtering some dirt through the sluice. There were tons of seeds to choose from, but I decided to go with industrial hemp. Reason being, it was a crop that we were going to need to use later, plus hemp in general just has so many uses in game. From here, there wasn't much to it. You plant the seeds, you do the funny little dance, and the crops they grow. Miracle, right? Well, when I broke the hemp plants, I was expecting for the seed output to double, but no. It only gave me back the 4 seeds that I planted. I didn't know if that was something that was exclusive to hemp, but unlike wheat where, you break a wheat plant and you get 2 seeds back, this one wasn't doing that. But that wasn't a problem. There were other crops that I had to grow too, including sugarcane. I planted the sugarcane on the sand, and from there, another little dance. Now that the farm portion of this quest was completed, I wanted to move on to something a little more useful. You see, this world is an ocean world, and how do you explore an ocean world without a diving suit? We had to craft this makeshift diving suit, and to do that, there were resources that we had to collect. One of them being brown polymer. To get brown polymer, we needed kelp along with some brown dye. Unfortunately, I had yet to see any kelp that grew high enough for me to collect. While trying to figure that out, I realized I could smelt the iron chunks into iron nuggets, so as long as I didn't craft them into clusters, they would smelt in the furnace. On top of making the diving suit, I also wanted to craft a backpack, and the first step to doing that was making a cooking pot. While the materials to make the cooking pot were processing, I decided to upgrade my furnace area. You see, 3 furnaces is always better than 2 furnaces, and once the 3rd furnace was added, I created a clay bucket. That's right, a bucket made out of clay. I didn't even know you could do that until now. You combine the bucket with a shovel and some bricks, and like that, you can have a cooking pot. Now that the cooking pot was crafted, it was time to find a place for it. Preferably over a campfire. This spot right here, it was going to do well. Now that the cooking pot was placed, I crafted some stairs, placed some slabs around, that way we could have this nice little cooking area. There were some things that we had to make, like this synthetic leather. But first, it was time to collect some kelp. That was a task I was putting off for some time, but now it was finally time to tackle it head on. Went to the barrel, smashed it with a barrel breaker, and no kelp until I tried a crate. I got 2 pieces. 2 pieces, it wasn't much, but with a hoe in hand and a funny little dance, I'm sure that the kelp would grow pretty quickly. Before turning back, I decided to explore a few other islands, finding other things like a revolver. I had no use for the revolver as I had yet to see any enemies, but it was a nice little thing to have. And lastly, I came across a small island with a single tree. It resembled the island in SpongeBob at the beginning of every SpongeBob opening. I broke one of the barrels on the island only to find a tool called a configurator. Wasn't going to use that, but I had it. After that, well, there wasn't much to do here. I decided to collect all of the sand using the vein miner, saved me a few steps of having to break up cobblestone down to the sand. Now that the sand was collected, it was finally time to head back. That kelp I had, well, I needed more of it. So I created a column that went deep into the water, made a little platform, that way I could place my dirt there, and from there, it was time to do the crop dance. And just as I expected, I was suffocating. All the more reason to craft this diving suit. I did the dance a little more, and now that the kelp was growing, well, kelp production would expand to an exponential rate. But this was just the beginning. I didn't want the kelp farm to get too big because kelp, I didn't need it for anything else other than the diving suit. So once I was done with it, I don't think I'm going to use it anymore. I placed the blocks down, planted the kelp 3x3, and yeah, once I do the dance here, the kelp is going to grow, and we're going to have plenty of kelp for our diving suit. Now that I had the kelp, the next thing I needed was honey. To make honey, you have to melt sugar into the cooking pot, which meant I had to grow more sugarcane. This took a while. For some reason, sugarcane is the most stubborn crop. No matter how many little dances I do, it just won't grow fast enough. But eventually, the sugarcane gives in. Now that I had plenty of sugarcane to harvest, the next step was to craft it down into sugar. The reason I needed to make it into sugar was because sugar melts into honey. I don't know how it melts into honey, but that's the crafting recipe. And the reason I needed honey was because this fabric that I'm crafting, well, when you combine it with honey, you get this fake leather. And with the fake leather, we'll have our backpack. All the sand I collected from the island, I began to melt it down into glass. That way I could start working on the helmet for my diving suit. While the sand was being forged into glass, I went to the cooking pot, took the sugar, placed it into a row of 3, and slowly the sugar began to melt down into a bottle of honey. Now that I had the honey, I combined it with the fabric I had crafted, and finally I had myself some synthetic leather. All I had to do was combine the materials to craft my backpack. I had everything I needed, and then I realized that I actually had some real leather all along. But you know what? The synthetic leather, it's gonna come in handy later. Trust me. There you have it. We finally have a backpack. More storage that we can use to collect items for supply drops or any other things we discover when we go adventuring. The backpack was a beautiful addition to have, and I was so excited to fill it with nothing but loot. But for now, the diving suit. The diving suit was priority. The first thing I crafted was the helmet. Simple recipe. All you need is some copper ingots and some glass panes, and like that, you have yourself a vintage-looking diver's helmet. This thing was crazy looking. I truly felt like one of those old-timey divers, you know, the ones that wear those scary-looking suits. If you've seen the SpongeBob movie, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it was time to give it a test and see what I could see. So I went into the water to do a little before and after, put the helmet on, and there wasn't really that much of an after. It made me wonder if I had to finish the whole suit before I noticed a difference. I also had to make the chest plate along with some pants. To do that, it was time to put the kelp to use to make this new polymer material. But to get the brown dye I needed, I had to grow cocoa beans. Good thing the strainer provided me with a jungle sapling, and as for the cocoa beans, I got them by putting dirt through the sluice. Yeah, everything was coming together. There's the polymer right there. All I had to do was craft a few, and once I had all the materials I needed, it was time to put the chest plate together. With some polymer pieces and some copper ingots, I now had the diver's chest plate. Next was the pants, and then obviously after crafting the pants, I had to make myself some boots. And here is the full getup. I was finally ready. Or was I? No, I wasn't ready. I still had to find a way to put oxygen in this thing. I mean, what's a diving suit without a feed of oxygen? If I tried to dive to the bottom of the ocean in this, I would suffocate to death. So it was time to figure out a way to put some air into this thing. But before I could come up with a plan, I noticed a little fishy friend who came up to greet me. Well, he wasn't very friendly. This is the reason why I had to put rails around my base, and he had quite a bite. Thankfully, my axe was stronger, though he exploded upon death, and well, yeah, that wasn't fun. The Modpack makers thought of everything because I thought I was gonna have to make air. Turns out that it's an award if you craft the suit. So I claimed the bottles of air. Now I just had to figure out a way how I was gonna put it into the suit. Pressurized air bottle. I guess all I had to do was drink it. Well, that wasn't really the effect that I had in mind. First of all, I only had 20 seconds of air from that one bottle, which led me to believe that I was going to have to make a ton of these things because I only had 2 more. I decided to drink it under the water this time, hopefully that way I wouldn't float up into the sky, but it still wasn't enough air. Less than half a minute. So it was time to figure out a way to actually do this properly. If you want to make pressurized air, you have to scoop bubbles generated by magma blocks or soul sand. Thankfully, I knew just the place where to get that. Inside the tower, the water elevator. There were plenty of bubbles there. Scooping it up, though, that was going to be a little annoying. Sometimes when you scooped at the bubbles, you accidentally get water instead of air. Thankfully, that wasn't the case this time. I filled up each bottle with pressurized air. Now all I had to do was put it into the suit. This time, with the block above my head, I began chugging the bottles of pressurized air, but like I said before, it's not really effective. But that's when it occurred to me. There was a crafting recipe that showed the chest plate surrounded by the pressurized bottles. So I immediately returned back to the base, taking the magma block with me, that way I wouldn't have to make so many trips. This is what I'm talking about. See, I got a water bottle that time. Anyways, now that I had the bottles of pressurized air, I followed the crafting recipe, and like that, I had 10 minutes of oxygen. I would do a diving test later, because the next task was to create cast iron. Now, how does one create cast iron? Well, first of all, you have to get that cooking pot out of the way. Next, you place iron ingots onto a campfire. You wait about 30 seconds, and after the iron ingots are nice and toasted, they convert into cast iron. I'm sure there's a science behind it. What it is, I don't know, but hey, that's how it works in Minecraft at least. Now, it may not seem like it, but the cast iron is actually very important. It was the next stepping stone for creating something essential in this playthrough. What that essential item is? Well, it's not this campfire. The only reason I crafted this was so that I could get the achievement out of the way. No, the next thing we had to craft was a jar. This jar was our key to entering the Nether. This was officially known as a tempered glass jar, and it can withstand extreme heat. Perfect for smelting items, and it's also perfect for creating obsidian. With this tempered glass jar, we'd also be able to make lava. But first we have to make tempered glass. How do you make tempered glass? Well, you have to put panes through the fire one more time. I'm going to show you how to do it. I got my glass blocks, taking the kelp out, plus I need some fuel for the furnaces, so with the help of some vein miner, I got some logs, put it into the furnace, and now I have to craft the glass panes. As you can see, the panes are being cooked once again into tempered glass. I don't know what the science is like I said before. I mean, if you put glass into fire, does it harden? Maybe, but yeah. And like that, you have a tempered glass jar. Don't underestimate its simple appearance. With this tempered glass jar, we're gonna do amazing things. As you can see, there are 3 slots there for the 3 items that you can melt down. You do have to put it over a heat source, in this case the campfire, and there you can see the efficiency of the heat source. You can use other heat sources as well, they vary. For example, lava is going to be harder than a torch, and anything from the nether, like soul sand fire, that's going to be harder than basic lava. This campfire is not going to cut it, so I went back to the water tower to collect another magma block. Remember, the campfire only provides 50% efficiency. A magma block is 100% efficient. Even with the diving suit, I struggle to wade through the water just to pick up the block. You may also notice that I have a second row of bubbles. That's my oxygen meter. It tells me how much air I have before I start suffocating. Now that I had my magma block, I went back to the base to collect the tempered glass jar. This area, I was going to keep it dedicated to the cooking pot. I would set up a separate area for the tempered glass jar, right here next to my chests. And like that, we had 100% heat source efficiency. To make things better, there was another supply drop. This one had some amazing items, like this netherite hammer. Like, honestly, how can it possibly get better than an object made out of netherite? This was a supreme drop. There were also pieces of quartz, along with some dust and a glyph of some kind. Didn't know what that was for. probably related to one of the magic mods, but in this case we're going to stick to the machinery, because as you can see, we have a lot of machine parts here, probably more than I needed. The chests were getting extremely full very quickly thanks to all of these supply drops, so I was going to have to start organizing pretty soon. The time had come to inaugurate the tempered glass jar. To do that, I was going to convert cobblestone into lava. How would I do that? It's pretty simple. All you do is you put the blocks in, click the mix button, and slowly the cobblestone begins to melt down until you're left with a little capsule of lava. You'd think that the lava would be stored in the jar, but for some reason that's not the case. You have to look around for these little pods, because as soon as it spits out an item, well, that item could fly anywhere. In this case, it's the left of me, but it gets pretty annoying. Sometimes it auto-inputs into the chest, sometimes it doesn't. It's usually a hit or miss. But now that we had lava, I was ready to move on to the next step, figuring out how to get the lava out of the fluid capsule. I tried pouring it like a bucket, but that wouldn't work. Then I tried putting it in with a bucket in my crafting interface. That didn't work either. In the end, I opted to do the most bold option, pouring it back into the jar, which worked. Which makes me wonder, when the cobblestone melts into lava, why isn't the lava stored into the jar? Why does it have to make a capsule? I don't know, I'm just ranting by this point, but yeah, now we had lava, which meant we could make a cobblestone generator, which means that we don't have to use the sifter and wait for pebbles anymore. This was a groundbreaking invention, and I had to get my hands on it. With the cobblestone generator, I was going to be able to generate multiple blocks of cobblestone automatically, and the best part, it auto-inputs the blocks into the chests for you. So yeah, you could automatically fill up a chest without having to break a single block of cobblestone. This thing was just doing its thing, and now all I had to do was wait for the cobblestone to accumulate. Now, even though the generation is a little slow, it is infinite, so you have to keep in mind that chests will fill up faster than you think. Hence the reason why they give you a storage crate. Storage crate can store 2,000 blocks, but with an upgrade, it can store over 16,000. Storage crate would act as the vessel for all of our blocks. It was time for a serious upgrade, the water pump. I wouldn't have to use buckets to fill up the sluice anymore. The water pump auto-inputs water into the sluice as long as you keep it wound up. So that's what I was gonna do, craft myself a water pump and make my life a little bit easier. On top of that, I wanted to automate the process even more, so I was gonna craft a hopper. The first step was to make iron ingots, and because I had the tempered glass jar, I could smelt the chunks into the ingots without having to waste any fuel like charcoal or coal. The only annoying thing was that I had to continuously press the mix button every time I wanted to smelt an item. But that wouldn't be a problem for long, you'll see what I mean later. After the ingots were smelted, I crafted myself a hopper, and the idea was that the hopper would auto-input the gravel blocks into the sluice, that way I wouldn't have to do it manually by hand, but it didn't work, so it was back to the old-fashioned way. At least there was still a glimmer of hope with the water pump. There I wouldn't have to auto-input water. I crafted a wood gear, and then from there with some cast iron ingots and wood planks, I finally had myself one of the best pieces of early game technology, a water pump. You guys, it doesn't seem like a big deal, I know, but I cut out a lot of footage of me pouring buckets of water into this thing. It just takes way too long. We also have the jar, that's a pretty big deal as well. Everything was coming together, but it was getting a little crowded again, so the time had come for another base expansion. With more slabs, I extended the platform, reorganized the chests. I even opted to build a second level. That way I wouldn't have just one big flat platform. Why not add some levels to it? Makes things a little interesting. Looking back on it now, it's a good thing I added the stairs for the second level because some of the stuff that I was going to put together was going to take up a ton of space. So I began putting up some columns and beams. They would act as the framework for this new level. Now, I won't lie. I know that this build is a little lackluster compared to the other things I've put together in different videos, but in this case, simplicity is going to work out fine. I don't have a lot of resources to work with, and I also survived a crash landing from outer space, so give me a break. I was going to dedicate this entire space to placing drippers. That way I could have plenty of dirt being converted into clay. At this point, it was looking like clay was going to be a common crafting item, so I wanted to be sure that I was going to have plenty of it. It was time for my favorite task, filling each of the drippers with water. Why? Because the next step required a lot of clay. We were going to start making alloys, and to do that we needed a forge. And the first step to making a forge is by making the bricks. And to make the bricks, you need a lot of clay. So I got the bucket out. It was time to start scooping up water and filling each dripper one by one. a very annoying but necessary task. Eventually, I was left with plenty of clay, so I guess that makes up for it, because pretty soon I was going to be upgrading all of my tools with the new alloys I made from the forge. I also needed plenty of sand, another ingredient to make the forge clay, and once that was broken down from the sandstone, it was time to get crafting. Went to the crafting table, placed the sand down, from there I would combine it with the clay. Now that the clay was added, it was finally time to make myself this forge clay. Throw it into the furnace, using lava to power it up, and it was slowly forged into bricks. Now that the bricks were being made, all I had to do was wait, which I could easily do while checking out this supply drop. There was some decent loot in here. I got a few gold chunks along with some silver chunks, diamond chest upgrades, and of course, it wouldn't be an OceanBlock supply drop without the infamous banana. I don't know why, but there seems to always be a banana included in these drops. By this point, my clay was already done being converted into bricks, so it was time to hop on the raft and make my way back to collect my items. I had plenty of bricks, all I had to do was craft them into blocks. Simple crafting recipe, just like making regular brick blocks. And with that, we had black fire bricks, though there were other special blocks that we had to make for it as well, such as a drain and lava tank block. The first block that we were going to make were these base blocks that would basically act as the heat source that would melt down the alloys. Now these base blocks were pretty easy to craft. All I had to do was whip up some copper ingots, which I had very little of, so I had to scour all over the base just to find some. Thankfully I had some chunks laying around, so I put them in the glass jar to be smelted. While I waited for that, it was time to craft the brain of the foundry controller. This is where I was going to be able to melt all of the metals down, inputs and outputs, all that stuff. All I had to do was craft myself a blast furnace. The blast furnace, obviously very easy, vanilla recipe. And then from there, I surrounded it with bricks to make the foundry controller. I collected my rewards, one of which was a book on the foundry, and well, there was plenty of good information in here. One of the most important things was a holographic schematic that taught me how to assemble the whole thing. Yes, it was very useful to have. Without it, I probably would have gotten a headache scouring Google and YouTube and Reddit trying to figure out how to assemble this thing, so props to the mod creators for actually including something like this. We were going to make a 3x3 foundry. Now, foundries, you can customize them however large you want, but in this case, we're going to go with the mod's own recommendation. All I had to do was place the bricks down now that the base was laid out, and from there, everything was set. All I had to do was add some fuel and some metals that I wanted to melt. But if you want to make tools, you have to pour the metal out into something, hence the reason you need a casting table. With the casting table, you are ready to start forging. The first thing I wanted to do was take the iron chunks that I had and have them melt down. That way I could make iron ingots. A much faster way of smelting instead of having to use the tempered glass jar, which only cooks one item at a time. Once the clusters were melted down, I poured the molten metal into a casting basin. If you can fill up a casting basin with all of the molten metal, it'll cool down into a block. In this case, an iron block. I now had a way to auto-smelt iron in large quantities, and with this, I could convert it into iron ingots. We'd be set to making any type of iron tool we wanted. The next step was to start making molds, or casts, one of the two. Basically, it's the hollow shape where you pour metal in and it comes out as a pickaxe head or an axe head. In this case, I was making an ingot cast. That way I could extract metals by the ingot instead of by the block. After putting that together, the next one I wanted to make was the plate cast. You see, we were going to have to start making a lot of machines, and these machines required lots of plates and other technological components, a lot of which we were going to make here at the foundry, which is exactly why I had to get all of these casts out of the way. And once I completed that, it was finally time to make an alloy, electrum, and what looked like silver? I don't remember, but I expanded the foundry, adding more bricks. That's right, the more blocks you add, the more storage space you can have. And the more storage space means the more metals you can melt. By this point, I had a lot of iron ingots, which meant I didn't have to be so reserved. This also meant I could upgrade my sluice from wood to iron. That's right, sluices have upgrades. There's a gold one, even a diamond one. But for this case, we're just going to make a simple iron sluice. An iron sluice means I can refine dirt and sand in a more precise fashion, meaning more ores can be extracted. I can even upgrade the mesh. So, there you have it, an iron sluice complemented by an iron mesh. All I had to do was provide the water, as usual. You may also have noticed that I have a hopper in my inventory. That's because with an iron sluice, you can auto-input blocks, which was fantastic because I didn't have to stand there providing each block one at a time. Now we finally had an automated system that does it for us. And look at all of those beautiful little ore nuggets that were coming out of this iron sluice. This was definitely progress in the right direction. We could even make a gold mesh, but we'll save that for later. The hopper was packed with gravel blocks, but it was nowhere near enough. So I got myself a storage crate which I was going to place directly above the hopper. That way it would feed stacks of gravel blocks directly into the system. The idea was to fill it with so many gravel blocks that I could just leave the whole system alone. Then, whenever I wanted to, I could come back, check on it, and find all of my ore nuggets inside a chest. To save durability on my hammer, I took all of the cobblestone that I had and compressed it. The more I compressed it, the more gravel I could get when I broke it up. Slowly but surely, stacks were being put into the drawer. I was going through cobblestone pretty fast. I mean, you really go through like 9 stacks in a second. It's not an exaggeration. Because I had upped my metal refinement process, I was going to have to start making even more space for more machines that I was going to use in the future. This meant an expansion of the upper level. With slabs and oak logs that I had grown from my tree farm, I took the platform and doubled its length. Now, my main goal was to increase metal production. I had finally refined a system, which meant I could duplicate it, and the more I duplicated it, the more resources I could accumulate. As you can see, I had multiple wooden sluices, which I would shortly upgrade to iron once the iron was ready. It was a little messy though. The pumps and the water, they did get in the way, but once I was able to clean it up, it was finally time to take this to the next level. With the wooden sluices upgraded to the iron level, I would have more metal than I knew what to do with. Here's the setup right here. It took a little polishing, but eventually I was able to fine-tune it to suit my needs. I wound up the pumps to their max intervals, and here is what the current setup looked like at the time, although it was a little half-baked. The next thing to add were storage crates that would collect all of the ores and anything else that came out of the sluices, along with some hoppers that would automatically supply it with all the blocks that needed to be filtered. The final cherry on top was the addition of chests, which I would upgrade to iron chests, that way I could have more storage capacity. Iron chests are beautiful because they give you lots of storage while taking up very little space. There we have it, but I also turned off the shader because my game was getting a little laggy. Plus, one thing I noticed was that without the shader, when you put the diving helmet on, the water becomes much more clear. So it wasn't that the diving helmet wasn't working earlier, it's just that the shader, it disables any benefit from the diving helmet, that being visibility. But enough of that. I melted some gold, made some gold blocks, and with these beautiful shiny gold blocks, it was finally time to make some gold ingots. Now that I had my gold ingots, well, the path was pretty clear from here. I was going to use these new items to craft myself a gold mesh. Like the sluices, the more you upgrade the mesh, the more likely you are to generate a valuable resource. In short, it basically increases the spawn rate for everything. Plus, it also allows you to filter more valuable items such as diamond. After stockpiling plenty of sand and gravel, I left the machines alone, just to let them do their thing. I went into the water and I began a little killing spree of sponge squid. Reason being, I needed sponge. The only problem was that these things weren't dropping sponge. I must have killed 10 of them, and not a single one dropped a block, just ink sacs, which made me wonder if these things actually drop sponge. But I remember earlier one died in the boat, and it dropped the sponge, so I don't know. But anyways, the reason I needed the sponge was because I was going to have to make an underwater build. One of the ways I would be able to drain the build of water was with sponge, but because that wasn't really in abundance at the moment, I was going to have to use an alternative technique. Dropping sand or gravel and just filling it up until the water blocks are gone. That was going to be the most annoying task in this entire video, but I had no other choice. So I finished the outline, built the walls. Now all I had to do was place each block of gravel one by one until I finally had an air pocket. Thankfully, thanks to vein mining, I was able to break up the gravel pretty quickly, so at least that chore was easy. I added some ladders, and basically the whole reason I have to build this room was because one of the quests was to spawn zombies, and zombies only spawn underwater. I don't know why, but that's just how it is. Not gonna lie, I was a little discouraged having to place down every single block to fill up this space. I mean, this was gonna take forever. So once again, I decided to give the sponge squids another try. This time, I swapped to a sword, and as soon as I killed the sponge squid, he instantly dropped a wet sponge. So maybe it was just the type of weapon I was using to kill the things. But every time I approached a sponge squid and killed it with a sword, I got another sponge block. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the weapon. I didn't need that many blocks, just a few, and in the end, I ended up with something around 4 or 5. Now that I had my sponge blocks, draining this was going to be a breeze. And honestly, sponges will always beat gravel or sand. I mean, they're just superior in this aspect. Although there was a little glitch, for some reason I was still getting the particle effects for a waterfall, but nothing to worry about there. It was time to complete the room, but first I had to plant some grass seeds because supposedly mobs have to spawn on grass? I didn't know that. I was just basing it off of what the Modpack was telling me, but yeah, the grass had to grow. So I waited for that to spread, and as soon as the grass was starting to get more coverage, it was time to start prepping for the ceiling. But first, I had to pour out some of the iron from the forge because it was taking up way too much space. Thankfully, I had plenty of basins, so I was producing iron blocks like there was no tomorrow. When I returned, the grass had finally covered up the entire floor, which meant it was time to seal the roof and let the water pour over. The water was flowing over the roof, and I don't know if that increases the spawn rate or not, but yeah, we finally had an underwater room where the monsters could spawn. All I had to do was wait for the first zombie to spawn, so while I was waiting, I decided to start working on a nether portal. This meant obsidian blocks. Yes, obsidian can be made in the jar. Now that I had my first obsidian block, it was time to start accumulating more. The nether was approaching, and who knows what kind of wonders awaited in there. I also sifted through dust because apparently dust gives you rarer item drops, stuff like redstone, gold, and gunpowder. That kind of stuff is extremely useful when you're stranded out in the middle of the ocean, so I let the sifters clean those up. Went back to go check and see if any zombies had spawned. Climbed down the ladder, and when I got to the bottom, I saw not a single zombie. So I was gonna have to do a little more waiting. Thankfully, I wasn't waiting long. As soon as the sun set, a couple of zombies spawned, one of them wearing full enchanted netherite armor. I don't know what that was about, but I'm so glad there was a barrier between us. I finally had the rotten flesh, not that I needed it, but it was just good to get the achievement out of the way. Now it was time to move on to more pressing matters. There were materials that had to be collected for our next objective. Using a soul soil block that I had laying around, I crafted a soul campfire. And with the soul campfire, I was able to apply more heat to the tempered glass jar. This meant I could do some serious smelting. Now that I had that combined with the tempered glass jar, it was time to start looking at the new recipes, like making cast iron. Do you remember when we used to have to put the cast iron on the campfire? Not anymore. Now we could combine iron ingots with a charcoal block and make cast iron automatically. Next, I made a second tempered glass jar because honestly 2 is always better than 1, and this one was going to be heated by the magma block that we were using before. Sometimes some of the crafting recipes are only compatible with those types of blocks. So now we had 2. The next step was super simple. All I had to do was make tons of obsidian blocks. Making obsidian blocks is pretty easy. You just put water and lava together in the jar and eventually they come out as obsidian. I did have plans to make a nether portal, but I had to make something else first, that being compressed steel. And the only way to do that, at least at this current stage, was by blowing up cast iron with TNT. I wasn't going to blow up TNT on my wooden platform, so I had to make a nice, safe, protective obsidian barrier for the TNT to blow up in. From there, it's as simple as dropping the items in and blowing up the TNT. Once the TNT exploded with an amazing animation, I went back to check on the ingot to see if it survived. Thankfully, it did. And on top of that, it was converted into a compressed ingot. This compressed ingot was going to be essential for deep diving into the ocean, because with compressed ingots, we can finally start making pressurized items. One of them being a pressurized steel suit of armor. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. There was a lot to review in this book, and by a lot, I mean more than I was willing to go over. That's one of the problems with mods. Sometimes they give you these books and they're so discouraging. I was just gonna keep blowing up stuff. That I could do. That was easy. With every explosion, I was getting more compressed steel ingots, and when I finally had enough, it was time to craft myself some basic compressed armor. Now, you can't just craft it with the ingots alone. You need a base, that being leather. So, I had to go get some leather. Thankfully, I had some of that synthetic leather lying around, and once I crafted that, it was time to make the armor itself. Each piece was pretty simple to put together, and honestly, I felt a whole lot safer, especially because I was playing in hardcore mode, and well, as you know, there are plans to go to the Nether. You don't go into the Nether without armor, that's just a basic Minecraft rule. So yeah, there we go, compressed armor. As for my diving suit, I put together a little armor stand and just stored all of the items inside of my house. I wasn't going to need this stuff for a while because the Nether is lava and I had no intent of diving into that. Notice that there are also some little diamond nuggets in there. Yep, that was from the sifter. That's why you got to upgrade your sluices and your meshes. That way you can get diamond clusters, put them in a tempered glass jar, heat them up, and you get diamonds. Automatic diamonds. Granted, they don't drop that much, but a diamond is a diamond, and it's great when it's free. Now that I had these beautiful blue rocks in my inventory, it was time to put them to use. I made myself an enchanting table. I think you guys know where this is going. Going into the Nether without enchanted gear, another fatal mistake. One that I've made too many times. I decided to put the enchanting table underneath next to the drippers. It just seemed like the appropriate spot, out of the way where it couldn't get burned by anything. From there, I had to make bookshelves, which is going to prove to be a little tricky seeing as how there weren't any cows to get leather. But it wasn't a problem. Thanks to the quest log, I was awarded 5 free bookshelves and a massive wall of text that explained an experience holder. I don't know why you need all of that to explain an experience holder. I think the name is a little self-explanatory. It holds XP. But yeah, that's besides the point. I was a couple blocks away from finally maxing out my enchanting table setup. To finish it, I was gonna have to do a few more dances in the sugarcane farm, and once that was done, I got my lapis lazuli, which I had from the sifters, combined them into a lapis cluster, and with the lapis clusters, I put them in the tempered glass jar so that I could have the regular lapis for enchanting. Then I crafted a bow, even though I'm a terrible archer, though going into the Nether without a bow just seems a little risky. Who knows what's on the other side, especially in this modded world. So I had that. The last thing I did was hop on my raft because there was one more item I had to collect. See, in order to go to the Nether, I had to have something called soul protection. That coming in the form of the soul lantern, which was found on this random little island that I came across. Now, I had to be quick about this because there were enemies spawning and they were more than I wanted to deal with. I collected my soul lantern and an extra just to be safe. And once I had my extra soul lanterns, I hopped back on my boat because I noticed that there were guardians in the water. I didn't have any way of protecting myself here, and seeing as how this was an ocean world, they had the advantage. All of a sudden, there were tons of them just spawning out of nowhere, and they were all targeting me. I made my escape. Happy to be home safe and sound, it was now time to make the Nether portal. I had all of my blocks, I had the flint and steel, I had the soul protection, armor, even a bow. There was nothing that would stop me in the Nether. I lit up the portal, gave it a nice stare, and from there it was time to see what horrors or marvels were on the other side. Once I transitioned, I saw that the Nether was worse than I could possibly imagine. I spawned right in the sky, I couldn't see any ground in sight. It was just what I thought. The Nether was a lava ocean world. Just like the overworld, there wasn't any solid ground to stand on. So I was gonna have to think of a plan. But first, I had to open a chaos box. A reward for making the Nether portal. Once I opened the chaos box, I was being attacked by this gross creature. A creature by the name of Taz who was blasting me with a guardian beam. I got nausea, I was taking damage from that hideous creature. I had to do something. So I waited for him to fall into the water, and every once in a while I would go out, swipe at him, and hide again. Rinse and repeat until slowly his health started to lower until he was closer to death. Eventually, Taz was no match for my diamond sword, which I had crafted with the diamonds I made earlier. Honestly, I don't even know if I included that footage, but yeah, I had diamond stuff now. And with that, Taz was dead. He didn't drop anything too crazy, just a diamond knife, but yeah. Chaos boxes, You open them up, expect chaos. As you can see, I opened a common loot crate, and one of the things I got from that was a jar automator. So, you know how in tempered glass jars, when I want something, I have to press mix over and over again? Well, with the jar automator, I only have to press mix once, and then from there, like a regular furnace, it will auto-smelt every single item in the jar. So this was a godsend. I could smelt things infinitely without ever having to add fuel. Look at it go, smelting the lapis lazuli without stopping. This jar automator was going to save me so much time for the Nether because look at all of the stuff we have to do. We were now in Chapter 2. There was a lot of stuff I had to accomplish, the first being making my Nether portal spawn a little bit safer. Using the cobblestone I had accumulated from the generator, I made myself a platform. That way, if any ghasts had any funny ideas, I was going to be safe. As we all know, cobblestone is immune to ghast explosions, so that was the way to go. The next problem to tackle was figuring out how I was going to get down there safely. So, I was going to make a ton of ladders, but the question still remains, how do I get down to place those ladders? Because I can't place them from the top down, gotta be from the bottom up. Thankfully, I had a fire resistance potion, one that was awarded to me when I completed one of the quests. The plan was to dive to the very bottom, build up a little column all the way to the top, and I would place my ladders from there. So, where was I going to place my blocks? Well, of course, on the bottom of the lava lake. Fortunately, there was no bottom, which meant I couldn't place anything. I had to find a platform, quickly. If this world was anything like the overworld, then there were some islands. At least that was the theory. Thankfully, the theory proved to be correct. Out in the distance was what looked like a bastion, the perfect place to start building my bridge, and then from there, my column. Carefully, I built myself a nice little bridge, something very simple, until I was directly underneath the platform where the portal was. Once I was underneath, I began stacking straight up, that way I could finally start placing my ladders. I only had the one fire resistance potion, so you can understand that I was kind of in a rush to get this done right the first time. Thankfully, everything went well. Well, almost everything. I don't respect a sneak attack, especially when I'm on a time crunch. I had a couple minutes left before my potion expired, and I had to dive down to the bottom again to place the ladders. So as soon as they were done, I wasted no time. I dove right into the lava ocean once again, ready to place the ladders. That way I could finally start exploring this godforsaken dimension. The ladders were being placed, and from there, everything finally came together. I now had an entrance and exit in and out of the Nether. I was set. Now it was time to explore. But first, I had to make myself a little safety barrier at the bottom. I had nowhere near enough cobblestone to actually make railing that would lead all the way back to that bastion. So yeah, I was gonna have to risk it all. The walk to the bastion wasn't that bad. Pretty straightforward, plus I didn't encounter any ghasts, so I was good to go. Though I was a little nervous. I have a reputation for almost always dying in bastions amongst my friends. I'm just terrible at it, especially when it comes to dealing with brutes. Seeing how this was a hardcore world, I was a little nervous. I think you can understand why. So I carefully snuck around, trying not to draw too much attention to myself. Made my way to the first chest, and inside, something pleasantly surprising. Not what I was expecting. Inside the chest was a Bastion Ring. A Bastion Ring that increases the XP of all the piglins that you kill if you wear it, along with some other junk, but there were other chests and I had to get my hands on them. I don't know what this mod is called, but I love that it's the one that allows you to upgrade the bauble. You see, the more XP you get, the more you can level it up, and the more you level it up, the more amplified the effects of the bauble are. But as exciting as that was, I had another reason for being here. What's the one thing people always seek when they're looking at a bastion? Not pig step. I was here for the netherite upgrades. I had a feeling I was going to get my hands on some netherite real soon, so I needed the upgrade to get the god gear. In the center of the bastion was a little island with a chest. I had a feeling that what I was looking for was in that chest. Well, my intuition proved to be correct, because when I opened it, boom, netherite upgrade along with some other good gear. Took a little while to get there with all of this cobblestoning that I had to do, but yeah, I finally had what I was looking for. Surely it was finally time to go home, right? Wrong. I was feeling greedy. There was more stuff in this bastion. I mean, I could feel it. So I pressed on. The expedition was not over. I carefully snuck around the halls, trying not to draw too much attention to myself, but sometimes I'd fail and a brute would charge at me. Thankfully, there were lots of blocks in the way, so taking care of them wasn't a problem. Once I killed this one specific piglin brute, I made my way to that double chest. I mean, it was just calling out to me. The only problem was that by this point, my inventory was getting pretty full, so I was gonna have to start picking and choosing what to leave behind. Thankfully, this chest wasn't really high stakes. I got a blazing flask, which supposedly allowed me to fly if there was fire present. I was gonna have to experiment with that later. The rest of the stuff was pretty average. Some arrows, gold armor, nothing crazy. The last stop I had to make in this bastion was at the very top, because there are always chests at the top of bastions, at least in my experience. Some of the piglins did not want to share what was in those chests though, like another unlucky brute who decided to charge at me even though he had no way of attacking. Look at this. What did he expect to accomplish? Not much. It didn't take long before I was done dealing with this brute, and once he was finally finished, it was time to see what little loot remained in this bastion before I went home, because by this point, like I said, the inventory was full, and I had to be mindful that this was hardcore, so I didn't want to push my luck. Looked around, making sure it was safe, and then once I opened the chests, just some gold ingots and a golden apple. There was also an armor trim, but to me those are usually pretty meh. Don't even apply them to my armor. Last chest had another bastion ring along with some rubies and some bone blocks and a couple of enchanted books. I don't usually take the enchanted books because they don't stack, so I left them behind. It was time to go home, but I did want to test something. You remember that obsidian bow I got earlier? Well, it was finally time to put it to use, and guess what? It worked like a charm. This thing was perfect for the Nether. It didn't burn up because it was made out of obsidian, which meant that I could take exploration to a whole new level. I had plans to go home, but because I had the obsidian bow, it wouldn't hurt to take a little peek around the neighborhood, see what else was nearby. So I rode around until I came across some structures, interesting stuff, like this little castle. From where I was sitting, the island looked empty, so it didn't hurt to get a closer look. At least that's what I was thinking. I carefully approached the walls. I got off the boat, carefully approached the center of the island, and saw that there was a trial chamber spawner, which spawned piglins. I had a feeling something like that would happen, so I rowed away. Another charm of the boat, you can make some quick getaways. I wasn't done exploring though. On my minimap there was a massive circle, which turned out to be this arena. This structure was by far the biggest build I had ever seen in this mod pack. A massive Nether Arena from hell. I had no idea what was on the inside, but seeing as how this was just monumentally impressive, I had to, of course, inspect it. So I got off the boat, made my way through a window, and the first thing I saw, the center of the arena, a fire, and downstairs, what looked like a blaze. Despite having a diamond sword and what I thought was some decent armor, I did feel a little out of my element. I didn't know if these things were going to be able to overpower me, so I proceeded with caution. This was no ordinary blaze, if I could even call it that. It looked like it was covered in netherite armor and surrounded by shields. Plus, it was fast, so I had to make an escape. I got far enough just to be a little out of his reach, and by that point, there was only one way to deal with this enemy. I had to craft myself a bow, because for some reason, the bow that I did make was gone. So I made a second one. Now that I had my second bow, thanks to the Bastion expedition, I had plenty of arrows to start pelting the enemy. One by one, arrow after arrow, I was taking this thing down. I'm sure whatever it dropped had to be helpful. The only problem, though I wouldn't really call it a problem and more of an inconvenience, was that because the bow wasn't enchanted, it took a while for this thing to die. I used so many arrows, I wasn't even keeping track anymore, but by the time it did fall, I felt like I had wasted more time than this was worth. Turns out that this thing was called a Revenant, and its drops were used to summon the enemy that would spawn in the center of the arena. Probably a boss battle, one that I had no intent of fighting because, well, look at my gear. At the time, I didn't think I was ready to fight anything that monumental, so I just looked at the items that this guy had dropped, some burning ashes along with some random things, nothing too crazy, but you know what, it was good to know that this was here in the event that I changed my mind. As for the lower levels, they were all pretty empty. Nothing much going on here, so despite this being a very impressive build, It wasn't really interesting in terms of its interior, just more stairs and lava. I could probably make a base here. In fact, it'd probably be really cool if my nether portal spawned here, but I guess we're going to stick with the Sky Island. At the very bottom, basement level, like I said before, pretty empty. Just more lava, and yeah, that's about it. By this point, I was ready to go home. I had enough of the nether, and there was a lot of loot that I wanted to go over, plus my inventory was full. So I got back on the obsidian boat and made the long trek home, but first, a little pit stop. Like I said before, I just can't help myself. The curiosity is too overwhelming. This island had a lot of stuff going on. Warped fungus trees along with some barrels, the type of barrels you see in the overworld, and a spawner that made more revenants. So yeah, that was a little mood killer. I had to get out of there quickly because those revenants were extremely aggressive. I think I had my fair share of pit stops. Unfortunately, by the time I got back to my cobblestone area, a ghast was waiting to ambush me. I was so close, I had so much loot, and I couldn't die here, so once I evaded the ghast, I just went straight home. One of the first quests to complete the Nether chapter was making Netherrack. One of the first steps to making Netherrack was first making redstone. We had plenty of redstone chunks that we had to smelt to make the redstone powder. You know, the vanilla stuff that we use to make all of our machines. Once I put that in the tempered glass jar, it smelted until I finally got redstone, and the beauty was that I was now taking advantage of the automatic jar modifier. I also had to make a basic fluid tank because we were going to need lava if we were going to make Netherrack. With this basic fluid tank, we could also store other things such as water, and it was just basically a big fancy bucket that held multiple buckets of lava or any other fluid you can put in. That's right, we needed a lot of lava, and you'll see why, but we'll get to that later. When you combine the redstone with the lava, you are rewarded with a beautiful 16 stack of Netherrack blocks. Now that we had the Netherrack blocks, it was time to take it even further. We were going to have to start automating other blocks, just like the Create mod if you've seen those videos. This time, we were going to focus on basalt. Automating basalt has always been a little tricky for me. First, we need some ice, and getting ice, well, to do that we have to backtrack a little to chapter 1. You see, the only way to get ice is to make something called Primogel goo. You put water on the goo and somehow it makes ice. I don't know what the logic is there, but we'll just follow the roadmap. I also needed lots of rotten flesh because I guess that's what you use to make the goo. Unfortunately, zombies weren't spawning, so getting rotten flesh here wasn't going to work. Thankfully, there was plan B. I could go to the nether, and seeing as there was an abundance of zombified piglins, getting rotten flesh was going to be a breeze. In fact, I knew exactly where I could get them. Back at the Bastion, where there were plenty of zombified piglins just waiting to give their rotten flesh. Fortunately, things didn't go exactly according to plan. Let me start with this. I made myself a little cobblestone barrier, placed the blocks around just to keep myself safe from any brutes. Hit the piglins, aggroed all of them, and ran to my little safety spot. Now here's the problem. Even though they all came, which is exactly what I wanted, the piglins, well, let's just say that the knockback on my sword was a little too strong, that and the fact that the piglins are really dumb. See how like 5 of them just went into the lava? Imagine how much rotten flesh was wasted in the lava. From all of those piglins, I only managed to pick up only 1 piece of rotten flesh. So I was going to have to rethink my approach. Maybe make sure that all of my targets don't plunge into the lava this time. On my second attempt, I was a little more cautious about my merchandise not getting burned up, although every once in a while, a little baby piglin would get through and give me a heart attack. Those little piglins, don't underestimate their size, they are lethal, especially in a hardcore world. But enough of that. I had 25 pieces of rotten flesh, which meant I could start making the Primogel goo, which also meant I could start making the ice. Now to make the Primogel goo, you need a lot of stuff. You need clay, sand, rotten flesh, and some sugar, along with dirt. What's left is this weird cobblestone looking block, but there's more to it than that. Now that I had the Primogel goo, I had to figure out how to actually get the ice, so I poured water onto it. Nothing happened. Then I noticed that there were some animations on the block, rotten flesh and sugar. So I poured water around, and then with some rotten flesh and sugar, I placed it on the block, and all of a sudden, a growing animation began. That's right, you have to feed the goo. When you feed the goo, then it reacts with the items around it, in this case water, and it converts it into ice. I also was able to claim a pickaxe with Silk Touch. Those are one of the rewards in the quest log, and with that I was able to start mining the ice. I also managed to convert iron blocks into another type of ore, one that I have difficulty pronouncing, but basically it was a little better than iron. See those crystals? Those are the new pieces of ore. So basically, the goo converts blocks from one thing into something else. It's basically just used for conversions. I wanted to take advantage of this new mechanic, so I converted a ton of iron ingots into blocks, placed them next to the Primogel goo, and watched them be converted into the new crystals. Then I took the crystals, smelted them into ingots, and now that I had the ingots, I was ready to make some brand new tools. But not before collecting the ice. Remember, I need to make blue ice if I want to automate basalt, and sometimes I get a little distracted with all of these new discoveries. This was going to be a slow, time-consuming process because I had to wait for the animation until all of the ice was formed. I needed a break, so I was going to test out the new bauble that I had collected in the Nether, the Blazing Flask. A flask that supposedly granted me flight in the presence of fire. Well, it did, although the flight was a little janky. For starters, there is a set radius. It's not like creative mode flight. And to make things worse, the flight isn't really flight. It's more like swimming. If I don't hold down the spacebar, I fall back down. So yeah, it was pretty interesting, but ultimately useless. The next thing I wanted to accomplish was the starting of another floor, a third floor, one where I would put all of my brand new machines, as this chapter involved a lot of mechanical stuff, a lot of multi-structured block machines, and well, you'll see when we get there. I also had to pave the top with cobblestone because this is the Nether chapter, and what does the Nether entail? Fire and lava, and some of those machines run on lava. Yeah, better safe than sorry, especially seeing as I were on an entirely wooden structure out in the middle of an ocean. Now that my new floor was complete, it was time to get back on track. Remember, I had to automate basalt, and one of the ways to automate basalt is by combining lava with soul soil and blue ice. I also had to make some sand and convert it into glass to make glass trapdoors. Just a nice frame to contain the lava. See, this is why we had to pave the top with stone. We're not trying to risk this place burning down. Also, don't laugh at me. It's been a while since I've made one of these basalt farms, and honestly, I didn't remember it off the top of my head. Yeah, there we go, that's the right design. And like that, we automated basalt. Now that I had automated basalt, I needed a way to break it automatically. So, introducing this block breaker. Now, I don't think it's called the block breaker, but that's what I'm going to call it because that's what it does. It breaks blocks. Although be sure to read the instruction manual before using this thing, otherwise you're going to end up very confused just like me. For starters, the block breaker has to be supplied with pickaxes constantly. Once the pickaxes break, you have to supply them with more pickaxes. You can also adjust the tick speed, making this machine faster or slower depending on the pace you want your blocks to be generated at. One of the prizes for making all of the block breaking stuff, along with the basalt, was a collector upgrade. Now the collector upgrade was essential for the storage crate because when the blocks get broken, where are they gonna go? They gotta go into the crate. But sometimes the blocks don't make it into the crate, hence the collector upgrade. It basically acts as a magnet. Once the basalt is broken, the collector upgrade pulls the items towards the oak drawer, and there, they're stored automatically. The beauty of the collector upgrade. As you can see, our setup was finally complete. I supplied it with pickaxes that were made freshly from the new ore that I had generated with the Primogel. Now it was time to move on. We had to make quartz. But first, I collected items from a supply drop that had just fallen. There was some interesting stuff there, including a tool belt, some golden carrots, along with upgrades for machines I didn't have, and then the whole platform disappeared. Yeah, that's what happens when you leave a supply drop for too long. Eventually, they disappear because they all run on a timer. And if you don't get the stuff from the chests, it just despawns. So be quick about it. Of all the items I've collected from the supply drop so far, I think the simple cardboard box was the most useless one. I don't know what it does. Maybe there's some utility to it. If you know, please leave a comment, but we're moving on to something more useful, like sluices. I had more sluices to generate even more ores. This time, one's from the Nether, because instead of feeding them water, I was gonna feed them lava. That's right, sluices filter through lava. When you filter netherrack through lava, you have a chance of getting quartz, glowstone, sometimes even gold nuggets. Now, I really needed quartz, and to increase the chances of that, I upgraded the iron sluice to a diamond one. The diamond sluices are phenomenal. They're probably one of the best sluices you can make. Plus, they take lava. Now, the only thing I had to figure out was how I was going to pump the lava into the diamond sluices, because a water pump only works with water. Go figure. So to make this work, I had to go to immersive engineering. Immersive engineering had a pump system, but before I got into the immersive pumps, I had to first start with the basics. Stuff like making treated wood and making charcoal and stuff like that. It was going to be a long road ahead, but I had no choice. I had to pump the lava in, and if there was an easier way to do this, I didn't know how. I made the engineer's manual. It's a guide that tells you all about the immersive engineering machines, how to build them, what blocks you need, what they do. It's the basics. For starters, I had to make an engineer's crafting table, then a workbench. It was just so much stuff, but like I said before, I had no choice. One of the first things I did was melt down nickel. I put the nickel into the foundry, and I had to be quick about getting it out because it was combining with the iron to make a new metal. So I had to pour all of the nickel out before none of it was left. I'm gonna be honest with you. At this point, I was improvising. I didn't know exactly what was gonna work and what wouldn't work, so I started crafting a bunch of stuff. The first thing I tried crafting were some item pipes. I figured, hey, maybe the lava will flow through the item pipes. That was just a theory. Now, these item pipes weren't anything special. In fact, they were kind of ugly. But hey, you gotta try everything. I also looked at another mod called Auratech, and Auratech is known for making multi-block machines. So I figured, why not give that a try as well? I made what was called a primitive machine core, and it basically acts as the base for everything Auratech. I also had to make a pipe wrench because I knew I was going to have to mess with some pipes. As you can see, I am pulling from every single mod that I can just to make sure that the lava goes into the sluice. As you can see, it wasn't very successful the first couple of attempts, so I figured it was basically the fluid tank's problem. So it was time to make another fluid tank, one from a different mod that fulfilled the same purpose, storing fluids. This one was from Auratech. I also crafted some Auratech fluid pipes, that way we could have the lava flow. I guess I was leaning more towards Auratech because it looked a little more official than all of the other stuff I was throwing together. Once I had the new tank placed down, I got the Auratech fluid pipes, connected them to the sluice, and once again, nothing was flowing. Obviously, I was doing something wrong, and I had to experiment with a few techniques, so I took all of the items I had crafted, placed them in a large chest, and just left them there. In the end, I had to return to immersive engineering, and the first thing I needed to do was get a magma block. You see, I was going to craft something called a coke oven, and to make a coke oven, well, to make the bricks for the oven, you need to have magma blocks for it. So I went to the Nether. If you're going to find a magma block anywhere, the Nether is probably the first place to start looking. Got on the obsidian boat, rode around, kept my eyes open for anything that resembled a magma block. But to no avail. I was searching for what seemed like hours. I came across a nether fortress, no magma blocks there, so I just kept going. The nether fortress was kind of interesting though, and I was tempted to go explore it, but in my experience, like I said before, I get easily sidetracked, and this was gonna be a massive detour I just couldn't afford. By this point, I had a cold realization. Finding a magma block in the nether, well, at least this version of the nether, was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Islands were very rare, and in the off chance that I did find an island, the chances of finding a magma block on that island were even smaller. I decided to give this one a try. It was multi-level and had some barrels, so maybe the barrels would have a magma block. Nope, I found everything else but the one thing I was looking for. Funny how it works that way. Inside each level were spawners that were spawning these gross, I don't even know how to say that, Draugr? Something like that. And that's when I remembered there were magma blocks in the tower I had discovered during the first 10 days of the playthrough. So, yeah, guess you always have to look closer to home. With the magma block, it was now time to make the coke oven. I went back with a couple that were left from the tower. Mind you, those were the last two, plus the third one that I had to make my air bubbles, remember, for the diving suit. I now had 3 magma blocks, and I think that was more than enough. They were converted into these little magma pellets, and now that I had all of that, I could finally craft the bricks. Now, it wouldn't be long before I had a coke oven. The coke oven was a 3x3x3 block structure, and to make the bricks I needed the magma pellets, the bricks, and clay. Once I had that, it was pretty straightforward assembling the thing. This structure was basically one massive cube, and well, it doesn't get any easier than that. Once I built the main structure, I had an engineer's hammer which I had crafted earlier. All I had to do was tap the center, and like that, I made the coke oven. Now the coke oven interface is pretty simple. Let's take a look. All you do is put coal in there, it converts into coke, and you also get this oil. Now the oil is what we need. Crafted myself a bucket to scoop the oil out, and with the oil, I was going to make something called treated wood. Treated wood is basically the foundation for everything you craft in this mod pack. You surround the bucket of oil with wood planks and you get treated planks. And now that I have the treated planks, I can start putting together the workbench. But first, I had to craft more because, well, like I said before, a lot of these crafting recipes call for treated wood, so it's best to have a stockpile. With the treated wood, I converted a regular crafting table into an engineer's crafting table. Basically the same thing. And with that, I made myself an engineer's workbench. Now, the workbench is a very interesting tool. It allows you to make multiple technical components for much larger machines, but the crafting interface is a little tricky. More on that later, because now I'm going to make a pump. The pump is going to allow me to put lava from the lava tank into the sluice. First thing I had to do was make a plate, an iron plate. Thankfully, there was plenty of molten iron in the forge, so I just poured that into the cast that I had, and from there, the iron cooled, making the iron plate. I had to do this a few times because I needed multiple. In the end, I crafted these little boxes. With these boxes, I was able to make the fluid pump. So now that I have the fluid pump, the time had come to figure out how to actually power the thing. That's right, the fluid pump requires electricity, and without it, well, it's just going to stand idle. So to get started, we first had to make copper wires. To do that, I first started off by making wire cutters. Now that I had the wire cutters, I just needed the copper plates to cut up. So I got some copper ingots, put them in the foundry to have them melted down, and then from there, like the iron before, I poured it into the plate cast. Now I had a few copper plates. With the wire cutters, I cut the copper plates into copper wires, and while the wires were going to be used for relaying power, we actually needed a power source. So I was going to make a windmill. Here are the windmill blades, and windmills, they generate electricity by spinning. So the better we position this windmill, the more wind it catches, and the more wind it catches, the faster it spins. I also had to make the sails that would cover the wooden blades, and making the windmill sails was pretty simple. All I had to do was grow hemp. Once the hemp grew, I did the little dance, and then from there I harvested it to collect the fibers. With the fibers, I was able to weave these large sheets, and once I had enough large sheets, I had to combine them together to make a single windmill sail. There it is right there. It's a little time-consuming, but it's a nice system. Next, I had to make wire coils. Those were going to be the cables that relayed the electricity. Then I had to craft something called a kinetic dynamo. It converts the windmill's motion into power. With the kinetic dynamo crafted, there was only one more object that remained: connectors and relays. I could explain it to you what it is they do, but it's easier if I just show you. First, I have to craft them. So, copper, terracotta, simple stuff. Next, I demolished the old setup that I had. This wasn't doing me any good, so it all had to go. With the setup gone, it was finally time to implement a design that I had created in a separate creative world. It was a simple one with the pump at the center of it all. I would have fluid pipes, and the fluid pipes were going to transfer the lava from the tank into the sluices. When working with immersive engineering blocks, don't forget that you have to toggle input and outputs, cause if you don't, nothing's gonna happen. I left myself wondering why this wasn't working for the longest time when I was designing it. Then I realized that's because I didn't set up a place for the lava to flow in or out of. So yeah, just a thing to keep in mind. Here I am with the kinetic dynamo assembling the windmill post. Little simple windmill, nothing too crazy. Props to the mod creators though. The design of this windmill is beautiful. To transfer power from the windmill to the pump, you have to connect them with the cables. Thankfully, I had the cables I made earlier. All you have to do is connect them between the copper connectors. And that's what I was talking about. You see? Now we're going to apply the sails onto the windmill, and once the sails are on, all you have to do is click the windmill and it'll start spinning. Although, I do think there was something wrong with my windmill, because no matter how many times I clicked it, it wouldn't spin. It It was probably too short, so I made it taller, added a couple of blocks in height, added the kinetic dynamo, and then from there, once I set everything back up, windmill connected to the dynamo, wires connected to the pumps, I decided to give it another try. Gave it a click, and like that, the windmill began spinning. Power was being generated, and now we had to finish up our little pump setup. The only thing that was missing now from the lava pump setup was the lava. See, there's the power flowing into the pump. Now all we have to do is add the basic fluid tank and the lava to go in it. The question is, how do we generate infinite lava? Well, as you can see, the tempered glass jar once again is going to carry this video. All I have to do is keep a steady supply of cobblestone inside of the jar. Ignore those annoying, disgusting phantoms. They always get in the way when I make a breakthrough. But yeah, as long as I have a crate with tons of cobblestone inside of that jar, then making lava should be a breeze. And it's going to get put in the machine, and I'll be good to go. It's time for a nice little rest, because the next morning it was time to wrap this up. I added a jar automator, that way the lava would always be flowing, and once that was added, the setup was basically complete. The only thing I had to do now was flip the lever on, and from there, the lava was finally flowing into the sluice. Ladies and gentlemen, the final setup. There it is in all of its glory. Next, I have to supply it with basalt. Thankfully, we have the basalt generator, so everything is going according to plan. I crafted a storage crate which I would place above a hopper, that way we could steadily supply blocks. Speaking of blocks, basalt. There was a lot of it, but nowhere near enough, so I was going to have to raise the speed of the block breaker. I took all of the basalt blocks and had them compressed. That way I could break them up into the dust that would be filtered through the lava sluice. Once we had all of our basalt dust, I'd put it into the drawer, and once it was in the drawer, it would go down through the hopper and into the sluice. I noticed that the basalt blocks weren't being broken, so I checked the machine only to find out that the pickaxe had gone through all of its durability. This meant I had to make a bunch of pickaxes and just stockpile them, that way they could be auto-fed into the block breaker machine. I made more of this ferrocore ore, I think that's how you pronounce that, and then with the ferrocore pickaxes, I took them and put them in a hopper. Hopper fed into the block breaker, and that's it. I just had to be mindful about the pickaxes inside of the machine. Next, I had to add a mesh to the diamond sluice. The blocks were just sitting there in the hopper, but they weren't being processed. I had a gold mesh laying around from earlier, so I would opt to use that. Once I applied the mesh, the blocks were being fed into the sluice, and finally, we had a means of generating netherrack. I was making plans to upgrade the gold mesh to diamond, but that would be later. I had to save my diamonds to make a second diamond sluice. I had very few diamond chunks, so I had to make them last. Set up another tempered glass jar setup on the 3rd floor, this time placing diorite because I was terrified that the lava was going to burn the ground. Once I had the chunks, I put them in, and that would yield 3 diamonds. Not that many, so as you can see, I was a little worried about losing them or wasting them. When I saw that one of them fell into the ocean, I wasted no time diving, searching for the thing. You gotta be fast, because if you drop items in this mod pack, they sink very quickly. I don't know if each item has its own weight, but the diamond was not floating to the surface. Thankfully, I was able to grab it in time and make my diamond sluice. I attached it to the other side of the lava setup that I had, and from there, we finally had our complete setup. All I had to do was filter out more basalt, and once the basalt was filtered, I would take the netherrack that was generated and compress it. You see, compressing and breaking, it's a very repetitive process, but I guess it's fundamental of the mod pack, and it's something I have to tolerate. As you can see, I have my crushed netherrack here, and now that I have that, all I have to do is put it in a separate hopper. Essentially, I'm just mirroring what I have on the other side. Same thing with the oak drawer. You place it on top of the hopper, and then the blocks are fed through into the sluice. Rinse and repeat. It's a little repetitive, this mod pack, but it's fun. It has its moments. Now that the netherrack was being filtered through, it was finally safe to say that this setup was 100% complete. I know I say that a lot and then I add more stuff after, but I mean it this time. And this is what I get for all that hard work. Glowstone, a little bit of quartz, and some soul dust. It doesn't look like much, but it's going to be very helpful later. But first, it's time for a break. Let's visit a supply drop and see what's inside. You remember a minute ago when I said I was short on diamonds? Well, it's almost as if the mod creators heard me say that, because in one of these chests was exactly what I needed. Not the ender tank or that gross blue sapling. Chest number 3 had diamond clusters. A lot of them. So, yeah, someone is listening to me, either an FBI agent or the mod pack men, but Whoever it was, thank you for this gift. One of the things I noticed when building was that it was a little annoying having to sort through my chests, so it was time for an upgraded storage system. Early storage with easy applied Energistics. There were some cables and an interface I had to craft, along with some other items to explore because now I had quartz, and well, with quartz, you can process it in many different ways. The first thing I did was convert my diamond clusters into actual diamonds. Then I got a quartz cluster and tried to break it with a hammer. That didn't work. It had to be a regular quartz crystal. So once I got the quartz crystal, then I was able to crush it into quartz dust. Once I had the quartz dust, I put it into a furnace, that way it could be melted down into an item called silicon. Once I had the silicon, that was the first of 3 items I had to create to show how many ways quartz could be refined. Next, I had to take my quartz and make a copper alloy ingot. To make a copper alloy ingot, you have to combine copper with molten quartz. So I got some copper, mixed it with some molten quartz, and the result was this new metal, a copper alloy. With the copper alloy, I'd be able to make a ton of new machines, but we'll get into that later, because now I had to make fused quartz glass. To make fused quartz glass, you basically combine quartz with glass. And once that's complete, the glass cools, and now you have fused quartz. With the fused quartz, another crafting item, we'd be able to make many things. So those are the 3 things you can refine quartz into: glass, the alloy, and the silicon. Now it was time to go off the deep end. We were going to finally start looking into Oratech seriously, and the first thing I had to do was make more ferrocore ingots to make this motor. To get started, I would have to make a new type of metal. You see those wires? They're made of a metal called electrum. We also needed invar, which I had plenty of, but yeah, to make molten electrum you mix gold and silver. As for the invar, I had plenty of that. To be honest, I think I had more than I actually needed. Reason being was because, remember earlier, I accidentally combined the iron with the nickel. That made a ton of invar, and it's just been sitting there. I melted down the gold and the silver, that was combining to make the electrum, and while I was waiting for that to process, I added some torches to my workspace because it was a little dark here now that I had added the 3rd floor. Don't get a lot of light now. There it is, my beautiful blocks of electrum. With these blocks, I converted them into ingots, and then from there, I claimed my rewards. The common loot crate reward wasn't anything crazy, not even worth showing on camera. As for the ferrocore, well, here it was. Collected all of that, then I remembered, hey, why am I breaking these one by one when I have Vein Miner? Call me lazy all you want, but I love Vein Miner so much. I was about to go to bed when I noticed a funny creature outside, a starbuncle from Ars Nouveau. This was a strange squirrel-looking thing, and honestly, I was happy to have a little friend on the island, so I left him alone. It was time for bed, where I would dream of new technology such as this foundry, but before I could make the foundry, I first had to craft a motor. Looking back on it now, I probably should have left the electrum in the foundry instead of converting it into blocks. I had to melt it down again to make plates, and once I had the plates, I made the coils, and with the coils, I crafted the motor. Now that I had the motor, I finally had my foot through the door. It was time to expand further on Oratech to make a foundry. This foundry acted similar to the one we had constructed, although this one was capable of making new metals and ran on electricity instead of lava. The foundry was also a little project of its own. You see how it looks in my hand? Well, watch when I actually place the block down. Take a look. That does not look like what I was holding. Reason being, we have to add a core block. That's what those little outlines are for. Once we add the core block, well then, the foundry will take shape. There were also other things I had to make as well, such as a steam engine, along with a boiler and a couple of other things. But right now, we're just going to focus on the boiler. The first thing I had to craft were these base blocks, and to make the base blocks, I had to use the quartz alloys that we had made earlier. See, I told you we put them to use. Here's the boiler, and as you can see, it looks nothing like the picture. That's because we have to add more core blocks. That's right, these core blocks, they are going to transform all of these little things. You'll see what I mean when we get there. I also had to make the steam boiler add-on, and to do that, I had to make something called adamant ingot. The adamant ingot was kind of expensive, so I found a cheaper alternative that used invar. Once I had that, the only thing left to make was the steam engine itself. The steam engine crafting recipe was pretty simple to make. All I needed were some electrum ingots and a bunch of other stuff that I already had. Once I crafted the steam engine, the time had come to assemble this whole powered foundry setup. Now, setting this up at the time felt a little overwhelming. Thankfully, they provided a guide, which wasn't very helpful at all, so I don't even know why I'm being thankful. This was going to take a little while to figure out, but after a few YouTube videos, a couple of wiki articles, and one Reddit post, I finally solved the mystery of how to make this work. Like I said before, you have to craft these core blocks. Once you have the core blocks, you click them, and the machine comes to life. Isn't that one of the most amazing Minecraft things you've ever seen? It was like watching a transformer convert into a car. Next, I added the attachment, and basically what followed was a fun setup process because I love the animations for all of these machines coming to life. The next task was getting liquids in there, like water and lava. As you can see, the water pump wasn't working. That's because I had yet to add the water, but once I did, even with the water added, there wasn't much progress. So it was time to take a new approach. Oratech had fluid pipes, so why not use those? The best part about these pipes is that they don't require a pump. They work automatically, so you don't need to set up an electricity system like with immersive engineering. Had I known this was a thing, I wouldn't have gone through the trouble of making the windmill, because as you can see, everything is flowing into the machine as it should. One pipe's gonna have water going in, and the other would transport lava. When the two come together, you get steam. Hence the magmatic boiler. The steam was being generated, now we had to transfer it to a steam engine. There it is, here's the moving animation, it is just stunning. As you can see, there's a big backlog of steam, so I better get it into the steam engine, where the turbines are going to generate the steam into electricity. We have the pipes here, and once I add this basic machine core, I give it a click, and like that, the steam engine, like the boiler, comes to life. We're transporting all of the steam, and there you can see we have redstone energy being generated. This was a miracle. Now that we had our machines fully functional, it was time to ensure partial automation. To do that, I made as much lava as I could. There were two tanks, one that was going to have the lava and the other that was going to make the lava. The one that already had the lava, well, I just transferred it over to the setup, and like that we had over 100 buckets of lava being pumped into the setup generating power, while the other tank, well, making more lava. Here I am making the last machine, the powered foundry. And like that, the setup was 100% complete. The power was flowing into the foundry. The only thing left to do now was to make new alloys. This is the power of the Oratech mod. You can even add little attachments to your machines that modify their performance. You can make them run faster, more energy efficient. Little things like that will make or break your Oratech setup, so be very careful about what you want to add. As a reward for completing Oratech, I was given another Chaos box, which could only mean one thing: another battle. This time I was face to face with a Minotaur. Despite the enemy's intimidating size, this wasn't actually a difficult enemy to beat. Number one, I had a huge advantage because I was in the water. This guy looked like he could charge and run super fast, except he wasn't on dry land. He was stuck in the middle of the ocean with me, which meant he was at a huge disadvantage. Alfred GG, at least that's his name, was gone, but he did drop an abyssal fragment, an item I had no idea how to use, and now that that was over, it was time to make steel. Steel is a beautiful metal to have, although it's a little difficult to make. At least it was, but now we have the powered foundry. All I have to do is combine an iron ingot with coke coal, and that's it. Steel ingot. I had plenty of iron ingots, and there was a small stockpile of coke coal that I had left over when I was making the oil. I put the coke coal in, combined it with the iron ingot, and slowly the foundry created what was a beautiful steel ingot. Heavy emphasis on slow. This thing is pretty slow, and one thing I noticed was that sometimes there is a backlog of water. If the water gets full, then the machine stops working. So I had to figure out a way to continuously drain water from the steam engine, that way it can always run. Thankfully, there was a way. This is a fluid trash can, and it does exactly what the name implies. It discards fluids infinitely. There's no capacity. Whatever you put in, once it's in there, it's gone forever. All I had to do was connect a fluid pipe to the trash can, set it to output, and like that, the steam engine ran while the water was being drained infinitely into a bottomless void. Where it went, I don't know, and I don't care. Now, it's time to make a diamond mesh. One of the best meshes ever, and we could do that because we had steel. First, I made myself some iron meshes, upgraded them to gold, and now that I had the gold ones, I created the diamond ones. Using the steel rods that I had made from our freshly baked steel ingots, diamond meshes were now a reality, which meant that we could filter some of the finest materials in some of the largest quantities. The diamond mesh was truly top tier. As soon as I had the diamond meshes, I immediately rushed to the sluices to swap them out. Gold was simply outdated. It was now time for the diamond era. Now that we had the diamond sluices, I immediately powered up the pumps, let the water flow, that way all of our gravel could flow through the new meshes. I took advantage of the fluid trash can and applied it to the coke oven. Reason being, I needed more coke coal, and once the coke oven gets full of that oil, it stops working. So I was going to have the oil drain into the trash can infinitely, that way we could generate more coke coal. Now, the reason I wanted more coke coal was because I needed to make more steel. Another thing I had to make was a storage system. You may remember that I mentioned it earlier. Well, it was finally time to tackle it because now I had all the tech to get it done. Early storage, although I think we are a little past the point of needing early storage, but it's time to play some catch up. First thing I needed to do was grow these mineral trees. These mineral trees were special because they drop crystals. Now, to grow these mineral trees, you have to give them extra space. As you can see, they are not growing. Reason being, you have to plant one sapling in the center of a 3x3 patch of dirt. Once you do that, then the tree sprouts. As you can see, it's larger than the average oak tree. The main thing I needed from these trees were the mineral chunks, that blue crystal there. With the mineral chunks, I'd be able to craft the components for my storage system. The only way to get more mineral chunks, aside from chopping down the tree, was by squeezing the resin out of the log. The only way to do that was with the squeezer. Squeezer technology is pretty simple. You basically place the block in there, and then you jump on top until the top presses down and squeezes on the block. What's left is a resin. I made a little setup, that way once the block was squeezed, all of the fluid would go into a basin where it would solidify into a block of crystallized mineral. Once I had my block of crystallized mineral, I could uncraft it into the crystals themselves, and with that I would have all of the materials I needed to make my storage system. Who would have thought that from trees you could make infinite storage? Well, not infinite storage, we're not there yet, but maybe one day we will be. The first thing I made were these little item interfaces. These are basically components that you hook up to chests. That way they can send signals to the interface where you can access all of the inventory space. Here I am adding the items there. Next, I had to connect them with a logic cable. This is how you link chests together. If you want multiple chests to appear in one inventory, then you gotta do this step as well. With the logic cables connected to the chests, I would have access to all of these inventories in one interface. Speaking of interface, the storage terminal. This is the access point where you can access all of your items in any place you want, so long as you have a terminal to open them from. To make the terminal, it required a lot, starting with something simple like paper. I surrounded the paper and made these strange little plates. I don't even remember their names, but as you can see, there are a lot of components that go into making an interface. So many components that I'm not going to name them off one by one because it's just time consuming, and like I said before, I don't remember. But if you do play this mod pack, well, the crafting recipe's right there. Thank God for just enough items, right? When it came to making the storage system, this was by far the most time-consuming process. There were so many things to craft, but in the end, it was all worth it so long as I got my interface. Once I had the interface, I could finally attach it to the rest of the system and look at all of the inventories in one place. Question was, I only had one interface, so where did I want to place it? But before I could figure all that out, I wanted to see if the storage terminal even worked, and by the looks of it, something was wrong because I didn't see any of my items from the chests. Must have been a bug or something. I added even more chests, these ones iron, that way I could have as much inventory space as possible. Then I added some little interfaces to the back, that way they could be connected to the system. Once they were connected to the system via these logic cables here, and it's just so satisfying placing them. I love how they connect all together. The terminal fixed itself. I don't know why it wasn't displaying the items before, but I'm glad it was working now, because honestly, I did not want to have to troubleshoot the thing. Now, where was I going to place the terminal? In the end, I opted to have the terminal on the 3rd floor. Reason being, this is where I was doing most of my work now. Side note, I gained a random heart on my health bar. I have no idea why that happened, but hey, more health in hardcore mode is fine by me. The next task in Chapter 2 was to make something called dark steel, and for that I had to combine metal with obsidian. I tried making obsidian in the tempered glass jar, but the lava was evaporating the water and converting it into salt. Makes sense, I mean if you put water over lava it's gonna evaporate. Once I removed the lava, the obsidian was being generated as normal. I waited until I had at least half a stack of obsidian blocks, and once I did, I put it inside of the foundry and combined it with steel. When you combine obsidian with steel, the product is something called dark steel. With dark steel, you can make a lot of stuff. In this case, I wanted to start making pressurized tubes. That way we could finally do some deep diving into this ocean. But first, I had to make an item called Grains of Infinity. To make the grains, you have to light a fire over deep slate. I was a little confused about this process, but after a little trial and error, I finally got it down. First thing I had to put together was some flint and steel. The original crafting recipe doesn't work. If you want flint and steel, you have to use a cast iron ingot. Once I had the flint and steel crafted, all that was left to do was to light a fire over the deep slate block. So I did that, stood around it, and waited for something to happen. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, when is something gonna happen? Until it did. The Grains of Infinity burned right off of the deep slate block, leaving only cobblestone behind. So once I saw that that's how simple it was, I decided to place down a lot of deep slate until I had plenty more. With the Grains of Infinity, I was able to craft a new item. As you can see, that's not the right crafting recipe. That right there, that cage, that's what I needed. The next tool I needed was an alloy smelter. Alloy smelter was basically just another fancy furnace, and like all fancy machines, it required a lot of fancy components, like these gears. One of the ways I made a gear was by making another mold of it, and then once the mold was hollow, I poured some iron inside, that way I could have all the materials I needed for my alloy smelter. There's the iron gear right there, and I'll always love the cooling animation. It just looks so cool when it goes from red to white. Here I am making more, and once I had the gears, I had everything I needed to craft the alloy smelter. Now, the alloy smelter needed power. Thankfully, getting power wasn't a problem anymore. Now that we had the steam engine, all we had to do was put a capacitor inside the alloy smelter, that way it could intake power. Thankfully, I didn't have to craft one because I was given a basic capacitor along with a magic mirror just for completing the quest. Now, we're going to leave the alloy smelter alone just for now, because there's another task I have to accomplish, containing the pressure. I have to make something called pressure tubes. They're basically going to help us get to the bottom of the ocean. To do that, we need compressed ingots, which we combine with glass. Now, my supply of compressed ingots was running a little low, and a lot of these machines here required compressed ingots. So it was time to go back to the old obsidian box and make some more. Remember, to make compressed ingots, you have to throw in cast iron and then blow it up with TNT. I guess something about the explosion makes it more dense. I don't know, but it's pretty cool to watch. Also, I didn't notice this until now, but it looks like the explosion does take away some of the ingots. Now that I had the compressed ingots, I combined them with glass in the middle to make a pressure tube. The pressure tube, I'll explain further what it does, but basically we're going to use air pressure, and the more I upgrade it, the more air pressure these tubes can handle. As you can see here, we have a reinforced pressure tube with a max pressure of 10 bars. But that's not all. We can upgrade it even further. To get the last upgrade, you have to make this adamant ingot, and adamant ingots, like I said before, are very expensive. In fact, they're so expensive that once you make one, you actually get rewarded. Got some XP, and in my loot crate, a golden egg. I have no idea what the golden egg is for, but we're going to save that for later. Now, to make the final form of the pressurized tubes. These ones come in the color blue. So you can see my inventory is getting a little full, so I had to store some stuff away. Thank God we have this storage terminal now. Now, the regular reinforced pressure tubes, they have a max of 10 pressure bars, while these ones right here, the advanced pressure tubes, they have a max of 20. So that's as good as it gets, but now we have to generate pressure, a breath of fresh air. I have to make a flux compressor. This is what's going to generate the pressure. There's a lot we have to make for this to work, so let's just start with something simple like light bulbs, which I'm going to craft at the engineer's workbench. But to do that, I have to craft the light bulb blueprints. The blueprints are simple, and once you have that, you put it in the workbench and it shows you all the crafting recipes you can make. Side note, I know I called it a light bulb. It's actually called a vacuum tube. For anyone who wanted to correct me in the comments, I beat you to it. Yes, to make a vacuum tube it's pretty simple, and once I had a small supply of those, it was time to move on to make the next item. But first, it's time for you to see how the alloy smelter works. Once I connected it to the power, it began cooking up some redstone chunks into beautiful redstone dust. Once I had the redstone dust, I converted it into blocks to make the next item for the item we're making. This one was called a turbine rotor bearing. A turbine rotor bearing, wow, that is a mouthful. And lastly, using the alloy smelter, I had to make myself some copper alloy. Once I had the copper alloy, I crafted the flux compressor, and with that we're greeted with this complicated interface. We see different types of meters, item slots, a whole lot of stuff going on here. One of the rewards for crafting this item was a security upgrade, one of many upgrades you can apply to these machines. The security upgrade basically makes sure that the machine doesn't explode if too much pressure goes inside. There were also other upgrades that I could make, and machines that I had to use to make them, like the upgrade matrix. I had to craft one of these upgrade matrices, and this crafting recipe wasn't that bad. All I had to do was make this type of reinforced stone, and to do that I had to combine regular stone with compressed ingots. Once I had the compressed ingots, I surrounded it with stone, and this produced reinforced stone, which I then converted into a reinforced slab. With the slabs, some iron bars, and glass, I made this new tank, and with the tank, I was finally able to craft the item that creates upgrade matrices. This is going to be a mouthful. The thermoneumatic processing plant. I think I said that right. Thermoneumatic. Anyways, here it is. Another overwhelming interface. There's just so much going on here, but it's pretty simple. As long as it has water and lapis, it will make an upgrade matrix. Now, like I said, this thing has to have a steady supply of water in it, so I wound up the pump, and once I placed down the thermoneumatic processing plant, water was flowing into the machine. That was one step taken care of. Now all I had to do was put in lapis as much as I needed, and one lapis would make you 4 upgrade matrices. Now that we have the upgrade matrices, we have the base to craft any upgrade we need. In this case, the upgrades are going to be used for our pressurized suit, but one step at a time, because first we have to make a pressurized chamber. For my purposes, the pressurized chamber wasn't that important, but it was an achievement that I had to unlock, so I started crafting the blocks for the pressurized chamber. This was called a pressurized chamber wall, and some other blocks as well. I'm not going to name them all, there's just a lot. But basically, this is what the structure looked like. It can vary in size depending on how much pressure you want. I also had to make some air canisters. Once I had the air canisters, it was time to scramble to make my pressurized suit. The pressurized suit, the best way I can compare it, is like the Iron Man suit. With the Iron Man suit, you know, he can do a lot of stuff. He can fly, he can go really fast. This thing can be loaded with upgrades, and depending on which upgrade you apply, that will affect which abilities the suit has. In this case, this was completely bare bones. There wasn't anything going on here, plus it had no pressure. If I wanted to do a deep dive, I had to put pressure in the suit, which is exactly what I was going to do using this little tool here. This right here, this was basically the charging station, and with the charging station I could load it up with all the air pressure I needed. But first, let's get back to making the pressurized chamber. This big box structure, there it is. Took a couple of YouTube tutorials, but I got it. Now I add the flux compressor, which is connected to the chamber via the tubes we had made earlier. Remember, everything has to be connected with a tube, otherwise the pressure is going to drop. We want the pressure to go up, so make sure your tubes are connected. As you can see, there's no pressure yet. Well, that's because we have to connect it to power. Thankfully, there's a windmill right there. Fortunately, the windmill doesn't generate enough power, but for this demonstration, this should be enough to get the point across. You can see the energy is going into the flux compressor, and based off of that little meter to the right, you're going to slowly see the little arm start ticking upward as the pressure starts to increase. You put your suit in that little slot right there, and slowly but surely, air pressure starts entering the pieces of armor. See all those notifications? Those are basically all of the upgrades that I have yet to install. But don't worry, we'll install some of them. Not all of them, some of them. So now that that's done, it's time to take a look at how exactly the upgrades work. Here's the pressurized chamber interface, by the way. Nothing crazy there. We'll get back to that later. Now, to actually apply an upgrade into your helmet, for example, you have to go into this menu here. In this case, the heart one, that basically gives you more health for your suit. And that's about it. But I still have to put more pressure in the suit, along with every other piece of armor. So I connected the flux compressor to the steam engine. That way there would be way more power entering this thing, and like I said before, more power equals more pressure. As you can see, those little air bubbles, that's the pressure going into the helmet, and it's a very slow and time-consuming process. You can even see the pressure going through the pressure tubes there at the very top. See, this is what a pressure leak looks like. Basically, what I added was a heatsink to the flux compressor along with an air vent, because it was starting to overheat. That's right, these things can overheat, and if they get too hot, they may explode. Not something I want. So we have a heatsink, a fan. Now it's time to move to the alloy smelter. By combining redstone, gold, and some glowstone, I made this orangish ingot. I don't remember what it's called. On top of that, I also needed some adamant ingots, and once I had everything put together, it was time to craft the first important upgrade for my suit. See this upgrade? It's called a depth upgrade, and with it, I can dive to a depth of 160 meters. If I tried to dive without this thing, I would get crushed by the water pressure. I applied the depth upgrade to my pants, and once that was there, as you can see, some of the boxes were now green. I was also met with a new menu where I could make setting adjustments to my suit. Off camera, I also crafted something called a Scuba Upgrade, which allowed me to breathe underwater, so long as I had pressurized air inside, of course. Now that that was complete, I had finally entered Chapter 3. Chapter 3 focused on actually diving into the abyss, so it was time to put the suit to the test. The benchmark was to dive to a depth of at least 160 meters. That was the max the suit could take before the pressure systems began to fail. So I slowly started sinking, taking it easy, but then all of a sudden I started suffocating. I had no idea why I was suffocating. Surely I had done everything right. I had the full set of armor. Or so I thought. I had only made the helmet and the leggings. It turns out there was a chest plate along with boots as well. So I crafted the chest plate along with the boots. I also needed to make some more compressed ingots. This is where the pressurized chamber comes into play. All you have to do is put them in, and instead of using TNT, the chamber uses pressurized air to make the ingots. So gone were the days of blowing ourselves up. I also made some pneumatic boots, basically the pressurized equivalent for the armor set, and slowly I had to wait for each of these items to fill with pressurized air. It was a very slow, time-consuming process, but once that was finished, it was time for the second attempt. I dove into the ocean, and slowly again I began sinking deeper and deeper into this dark abyss, wondering what awaited me at the bottom. Hopefully it was going to be safe. Well, my hopes were shattered. Soon as I got to the bottom, I was being attacked by an unknown hostile entity. I had to get to the very top of the surface because I didn't have any means of defending myself. Clearly, I was at a disadvantage. So it was time to fix that problem. I needed a weapon. I needed a railgun. A railgun is a weapon that shoots rods, and basically like a spear gun with no strings attached. So all I had to do was craft a power source for the railgun, which turned out to be more complicated than I thought. For starters, I had to make a bottling machine. Here is the schematic for the bottling machine. It's an immersive engineering tool that basically does what it says in the name. It bottles items for you. Here I am assembling the bottler. Honestly, I'm so happy that immersive engineering gives you a little guide on how to assemble this thing. A hologram would have been nice just like the Foundry, but this is just as good. I added the conveyor belts, and once that was set, all I had to do was tap the center of the fluid pump with my engineer's hammer, and the machine would be assembled. There it is. Now I just had to figure out how to use it. Well, the first thing I had to make sure was that it had some power. That's a no-brainer. Second, I had to make something called a squeezer. The squeezer was part of a long line of crafting recipes that I had to follow. You'll see when we use it. Anyways, both machines were going to be powered up, and from there it was time to make something involving graphite. Yes, I know it can be a little confusing. On top of that, I had to make a sag mill as well. All of this to make a weapon. It seems like overkill, but these tech mods, they really make you jump through hoops and hurdles just to get one simple thing. Now that I had the sag mill, I had to give it some power. It was sharing the capacitor with the alloy smelter. I got some coke coal and ground it up into coke coal dust. Now that I had the coke coal dust, it was time to take it to the squeezer. I put the coke coal dust into the squeezer, and slowly it was being squeezed into a new item, this one called graphite dust. That's right, we converted coke coal into graphite. And now with the graphite, we take it to the bottling machine. For anything to happen, I have to supply it with oil, which meant I needed a storage tank. So I took the portable tank that had lava inside of it, and I had to drain it out. I would drain the lava into the other tank that was powering the boiler. There you see the lava being transferred from one unit to the other. Once the tank was empty, I connected it to the bottling machine, and now all I had to do was supply the oil, which would flow into the machine itself. Then I made a steel plate. The reason I needed a steel plate was because I needed to take it to the engineer's workbench to cut it into a plate mold. With the plate mold in hand, all I had to do was combine it with the graphite dust, and then from there, the machine would take care of the rest. At least I thought. I was waiting for something to happen, and even though the conveyor belt was moving, the item wasn't. Took a little troubleshooting until I figured out that I had to flip the lever. Don't forget to flip the lever. There we go. With that, I had my graphite plate. And with the graphite plate, I could finally resume to crafting the items I needed for the railgun. I combined all of the blocks together along with the graphite plate to make what was called an accumulator. What does the accumulator accumulate? Power, of course. This is the battery for the railgun right here. It takes a lot of patience to make it, but once you get that out of the way, everything is simple. Actually, no, it's not simple. It's not simple at all, because now I have to make plastic, which meant I had to make another machine that would make plastic. Using fluid separation, I had to go back to Oratech. The machine I had to craft was called a centrifuge. Basically, it spins around really fast, and because of the speed of the spin, it somehow separates the fluid from the item. In this case, to make a centrifuge, I had to make different types of circuits, starting from a basic circuit all the way to an advanced circuit. And to make the circuits, I had to craft even more machines. This one called a metallurgic infuser, another item that had to be powered. Thankfully, we had the steam engine, otherwise this would have been a nightmare. With the metallurgic infuser, we were going to have to convert different metals into different forms. First of all, redstone was the fuel. I guess it uses some type of chemical process to turn the metals into these types of chips here. As you can see, that is the basic chip. Then I also needed to convert copper into this other weird alloy, and once the alloys are combined with the chip, you have another version of the circuit. But you gotta upgrade it one more time to the advanced circuit. To do that, you need diamonds, but not just any diamonds, they have to be an enriched diamond in an enrichment chamber, another machine. Once the diamonds were done being enriched into these blue crystals, you take the crystals, you put them into the metallurgic infuser, there they are used as the fuel for the chemical process, and lastly, you add these little alloys here. Once the alloys are done being converted into those blue alloys there, you then surround it with the advanced circuit, and you finally get the elite control circuit. Oh my gosh, I have to catch my breath, that is a lot. With the elite control circuit, you now have a centrifuge. Now it's time to make plastic, but first let's add the missing core blocks, that way the machine can come to life. If anything makes up for all of this work, it's these animations. They are just crazy good. Now I need something to put into the centrifuge. In this case, let's go with wheat. I grew tons of wheat, and with the wheat, I'm gonna have to combine it into this weird wheat clump or packed wheat. Somehow there's moisture in this, which we have to take out, so the centrifuge is gonna do its thing, but not before adding a fluid separating attachment. Once you add that add-on, then you add water into the machine. Once the water is added, the machine begins to spin, and what you're left with is this gross, saggy thing of moss. I don't remember what it's called. But you spin it around one more time with the moss inside, and then the moss is somehow turned into plastic. I don't know if that's how it works in real life, but I don't think we're striving for realism in this mod pack. Now that I had my plastic sheet, I could finally craft the railgun. But wait, there's more. The railgun needs power. And of course, ammunition. But first, let's just stop and admire this thing. It's pretty cool looking. Okay, now we have to make a little charging station. The charging station wasn't that bad. It took 2 seconds to craft. You put the railgun into the charging station, and once it glows green like that, that means the railgun is fully powered. I had a chaos box laying around, so I decided to put the railgun to the test, using iron rods as ammunition. Not sure if different rods do different types of damage. My enemy was once again the Minotaur, who was back for revenge. I fired the railgun, and only after a couple of tries, this guy was down for the count. The only issue was that the railgun ran out of power very quickly, so I had to craft myself a battery backpack. Once I had the battery backpack, taking the railgun around with a lot of power, well, that's it. That's the problem solved right there. Next, I had to make a flipper upgrade for my feet, and once I had the flipper upgrade applied to my boots, my swimming speed would be doubled. So not only would I be able to be on the offensive, but it would be offensive with great maneuverability. Look how fast I swim now. This suit is absolutely amazing, and if I had had it in the beginning of the playthrough, honestly, we probably could have completed this pack in one go. But that's enough of that. Let's assemble the backpack, that way I can go and explore this ocean. I got the HV accumulator, which was now charged. Now all I had to do was attach it to the accumulator backpack. To do this, I had to go to the engineer's workbench, and combining it was relatively simple. Put both of them in the slot, and like that, they combine. Now that they were equipped, I put it on, and it was time to begin the deep dive. I sank quickly to the bottom, trying to find the first enemy to target. I had to test the railgun on something, and when I found my target, instant success. These things were no match for the power of my invention. With the railgun, I was now completely safe and at liberty to explore the rest of the ocean floor. But first, a little more target practice, because while the accumulator works well, the gun is only as good as the person behind the gun. I dove down to the depths of the cave here, seeing how far I could go, but once I was approaching that dangerous threshold of 160 meters, I got a warning from my suit. If I were to dive any deeper, I would get crushed, so I decided to leave the crushing depth alone. Day 100. It's time to see what was at the bottom of this ocean, and I found what looked like ruins, an aquatic catalyst. I don't know what this did or what it was for, but I collected it anyway. Whatever it was, I'm sure it could be of use to me, so better to save it now than to leave it behind when I won't be able to find it again. There was also this unnatural generation in the ground, looked kinda man-made, so I broke through the blocks only to discover a hidden chamber, an air pocket, and inside of this air pocket, items like a giant crystal, barrels, pots, lanterns, even a lectern. There was a ton of stuff in here. I looked inside some of these barrels and found pieces of prismarine along with other items. Nothing too crazy, just pressurized air bottles that I didn't need anymore. Aside from that, there wasn't a lot here, so I decided to abandon this place in search of something a little more interesting. I was keeping my eyes out for something like the lost city of Atlantis. If I were to discover an underwater city, well, that would be 1,000 times better than this lame little cave. Well, the next discovery wasn't a city, but it was just as interesting. It looked like a boss arena. I mean, come on. There's something at the center of these columns. How could that not be a boss arena? As I got closer, I saw a spawner which summoned this massive kraken-like creature. This guy was out for blood, plus he had a friend. Thankfully, I had the railgun, and with it, I began shooting as many rods as I could at the enemy. I'm not gonna lie, these guys were pretty tough. They took hit after hit. Eventually, the minion died, but the boss was something else. He was made of tougher stuff because I wasted almost all of my ammunition on him, and even then, it looked like he wasn't any more weakened. It also didn't help that there wasn't a boss bar, so was this even a boss? Could this just be a regular mob? If that was the case, then I was way out of depth. There were dangers down here that I was not ready for. On top of that, the pressure in my suit was running low, so I was going to have to abandon this battle, otherwise I would be crushed, suffocated, and then dead. I swam to the very surface, pledging that I would return to finish what I started, but for now, that was going to be it. This was 100 days in OceanBlock. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was a little more complicated than I thought it'd be, but that's all. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. This has been Doublesal. Have a great day.